Hello everyone, I'm Extra Cheesy 87 and this is our discussion video on Let's Play The Legend of Heroes, Trails from Zero, and Trails to Azure. This video is, as you can probably tell by the time, it's gonna be a freaking long one, dude. Oh my god, I greatly underestimated how much I had to talk about in regard to these two games. Most of it's Azure. I do have some stuff to say about Zero, but I've got less to say about it because a lot of the stuff I want to say about Zero we talked about in the Azure Let's Play, but basically this will probably be like, I wouldn't be surprised if we go over 2 hours with this, just based on I've got 14 pages of notes to guide me through this video. Almost 5,000 words of bullet points. Oh boy. Basically we're going to divide this into 3/4 main parts. We're going to talk about Zero, going to talk about Azure, kind of talk about them overall, and then we've got some viewer requested topics that I'm going to do at the very end of the video. And then we'll also talk about the Cold Steel Let's Play at the end, at the super end of the video, I guess I should specify. Talk about what we're going to do for that. The long and the short of it is it'll be starting pretty soon. This is both going to be a discussion of the games themselves and also a bit of a discussion on what it was like to do like a Let's Play of them, like kind of. This aspect may have to be a little bit abbreviated just because the video is going to be so long, but like maybe like kind of some of my thought processes when it came to recording the game and stuff like that. So with that said, I think we're going to get started. So Zero was kind of a first. It was the first game that I did with this microphone. Now, the audio was a bit worse back then because I didn't really know how to set it up for this microphone. Definitely, like, kind of Zero was a bit of a lamb to the slaughter in regard to how to set all that up. It and maybe the first, like, couple Let's Plays I did with this mic. But it's still basically the first Trails Let's Play I feel, like, completely proud of. I think the audio, I did have to listen to a few of the videos from the Zero Let's Play, just doing some research for some stuff we'll talk about in a second. Like, I wanted to revisit a couple scenes, but when I say in a second, it'll be like in an hour. But and I was like, yeah, it definitely does feel a little wonky, but overall I am pretty proud of the Zero Let's Play, like from a quality standpoint. And the game itself kind of just feels like a refinement of the original Trails in the Sky game. Like, it's just kind of a better version in every regard. Now, it's not a fair one-to-one comparison because Trails in the Sky 1 had a lot of groundwork to do. Like, it was basically kind of, I mean, it's not just a prologue for Trails 2, it's a prologue for like the entire wider series as a whole. It lays down a lot of the foundation that let the rest of the series kind of go on to be so good. So it's kind of like an unfair game to really compare any of them to, but Zero in a way is kind of similar in the sense that it's, you know, you're kind of starting back from square one a little bit, from like a humble beginning up until ultimately helping save the entire country. Much like in Trails in the Sky, where you start off, you know, doing very minor odd jobs, and before you know it, and by before you know it, I mean like 30 hours later, the longest 30 hours of your life, you're helping save the country from a coup, which is kind of what happens in Zero a little bit. It's not like a political coup, but it's similar concept. The pacing felt a lot better in this game, though, which is probably the biggest recurring complaint that the original Trails in the Sky game gets, and it's the reason why a lot of people kind of do end up skipping it and moving on to like Cold Steel or something, is because, well, I don't know, I haven't played it, but I've heard that apparently the pacing's a little bit better, or at the very least it's just newer and shinier. But one of the things that I think really helped improve the pacing of Zero, though, was getting your entire party right at the start. Even though you have a smaller overall cast of characters, just getting those 4 main guys and then just, like, being connected to them from the very start, having a full party for all the combat sections, made combat just feel a lot better, and it went smoother and whatnot. Like, you never really had any, I mean, those made like a couple sections here and there, I think, where you only had like 2 party members. I know that happens in Azure, but I'm trying to think, does that happen in Zero? Maybe it does, I can't really remember. I know there's some times where you split up, but I don't think you ever have any combat. I guess in the Shores auction section, right, it's you and whoever you're paired up with is your partner for some of that combat there, but then afterwards you reconvene with everyone, so the actual main boss and everything you have your full party for. So I do also, speaking of kind of one of the things that Zero does right from the start, is I think the idea of having the entire game take place in like one city and the surrounding areas is so good. It fits the Trails formula of having like these NPCs that you talk to again and again throughout the game over and over, and they have like their own basic little like mini storylines and character arcs. It fits the idea of being in the same city like so well, because since you're kind of already always going to the same locations, it's a lot easier to just kind of naturally end up talking to people and discovering that like, hey, like NPCs, they say they got a lot of stuff to say. Because I think that's one of the things that like even when I played Trails in the Sky 1, like I knew that there was like a lot of NPC dialogue, but it was harder to kind of care about it at first because you don't know any of these characters, and for a lot of them you only see them, you know, maybe two or three different times throughout the game, because you're kind of constantly moving on to new cities and meeting new NPCs. But whereas in Zero, you know, by the time you finish like the second chapter, you've had a chance to talk to each NPC like 10 different times, right? Just based on the way that the dialogue updates every single time. So it like actually really makes the city feel like super alive, which is kind of funny that like a very small scale game in the grand scheme of things has a city that feels more alive than in basically any other like AAA title out there, just because each NPC feels like they have a purpose and a reason for being in the city. Even though, I mean, at times you can maybe say there's a disconnect there, because Crossbell is supposed to be this gigantic metropolis that has like 100 people in it, but I do like the idea that those 100 people are very well developed for the most part, and they all have stuff to say, and it's interesting, and even if it's not directly like important, it's just well written and fun to read. And just that kind of natural extension of being in the city the entire game made it a lot easier to do that, as opposed to like say, because I mean I think there's sometimes in like Trails 1 and 2 or Trails in the Sky 1 and 2 where like, yeah, you can go back to like maybe a previous city and talk to people, or people from like way back in like the start of a route or something, but it's just kind of, it's more of a pain, whereas getting around in Zero and Azure to talk to everyone is a lot easier. In hindsight, though, I do wish I had done more talking in Zero. My mindset for Zero was a bit different than it was for Azure. Like, I was more comfortable taking my time to talk to, like, major characters and do some discussion, but I wasn't as invested in all the regular NPCs. And I kind of had this feeling of, like, you know, we gotta keep things moving still. I'm a bit more comfortable in that regard and willing to, like, take my time and just accept that if people don't want to watch certain aspects of that, they can just skip it. But yeah, that's kind of something I do wish we had done more of in Zero, was doing more exploring, more talking to various NPCs whenever the story would update. But another thing about like this is kind of jumping forward a slight bit, but this approach to staying in the entire city for the most part did really pay off in Azure, because then you're already invested in all the major like characters and even the random NPCs by the time Azure starts. So you're more willing to start talking to everyone right from the beginning of the game and then keep doing that throughout, because pretty much, I mean, we didn't see everything in the Azure Let's Play, but I was pretty good about trying to talk to, or at least go to every area and talk to every NPC. I mean, there was some times where I was like, okay, I kind of skipped some of the more minor ones just to keep things moving, but for the most part, I mean, we did a lot better job in terms of NPC talking. Let's see, what I kind of lost my train of thought in my notes here. Oh yeah, another benefit of the game having the giving you all your party members right from the start, and having a smaller cast of characters, is that each one is developed faster. By like halfway through chapter 3, you've pretty much had like a nice heart-to-heart scene with each character. You talk to Ellie on the roof of the SSS building. You have the Tio scene when you're doing that thing for Yona in the Geofront. Is that when you're doing it for Yona? I can't remember. I assume that's that scene where she talks about how she knew Guy and everything, and Guy's the one who rescued her from the cult, which I'm trying to remember. They don't really go into detail about the cult until later, right? In the hospital scene. I can't remember if you know that she was involved, or she just doesn't tell you the details until then. I think it's that you actually know, she just doesn't tell you the details until the actual you're in the hospital. And then with Randy, you have the little heart-to-heart scene after the battle race in the downtown district. And so like you kind of feel like a connection to all three of your main party members like pretty early on into the story, which is nice. Another thing that's good about Zero is the slow, like it really nailed that slow progression of steadily more important events, which is something that like I kind of liked about in Trails in the Sky 1 and 2. Did pretty well. But this game I think does it even better, where, you know, in the prologue you're solving like a gang problem, like very small, isolated event, where it's just kind of some thugs that no one else really can bother to deal with. But the SSS comes in, resolves the issue, and then you move on to solving this case of like mysterious warhounds that are plaguing an entire village, so it feels a bit more smart, higher scale. That's not really the word I'm looking for, but like a higher order of magnitude than just helping like a single district, even though technically the district probably has more people in it than Armorica. But the element of a mystery there kind of makes it seem like it's something that like, oh, only the SSS could do with Lloyd's big brain. And then you move on to Chapter 2, where you start to actually do really important stuff. You stop the assassination of Mayor McDowell, which granted, to a degree, them stopping the assassination is presented almost as a, not an accident, but they're kind of led along to getting to stop it. I'm trying to remember exactly how Trails 2 plays out in that regard, but essentially the reason the SSS is able to find that out is kind of a series of coincidences in regard to like that note that is sent to Riksha and everything, about that's sent. I'm trying to remember the exact specifics of it, right? The note is sent to Ilya pretending to be Yin, and then Riksha, who's Yin, obviously is like, I didn't send that shit, and that's how, you know, that whole thing gets started. But and then in Chapter 3, you know, you're butting heads with the mob at last. You're fighting like, you know, a pretty serious criminal organization, and you don't necessarily beat them, but you do kind of get one up on them by defeating Garcia and getting to escape. And then for the final like climax of the chapter, you're basically kind of like taking on the army and super soldier mob members. You're stopping a coup and fighting and like individuals imbued with demonic power. Like it just like that progression feels so nice of the SSS getting to do steadily more and more important things. And it also feels like you have a very active impact on the story and the fate of Crossbell. Which is why, like, I think the assassination scene is so important, because it kind of establishes the gang as, like, having a real victory at this point and an active effect on the city, which is something that I think Azure was lacking at least for the first 70% of the game. Zero also has, like, a really strong cast of side characters, many of whom are more fleshed out in Azure. It is nice to see Joshua and Estelle coming back, and I do like the way they're integrated into the story, in the sense that they're kind of like, trying to think how to phrase this. Like, I mean, it's just cool to see returning characters, like, in general. It is a little weird that Joshua and Estelle do kind of feel like they're nerfed for the plot. I guess, kind of, in a way, it's almost like they kind of got ahead of themselves by letting them beat Wiseman fused with the Oriel in Trails 2. Because then they kind of had to, like, scale them back so that they're, like, competent, but they're not, like, you know, ungodly strong anymore. Which is it's a little odd, but it's also understandable. The Rin storyline, I think, is, like, the main carry point of, especially, like, Chapter 3. Because Chapter 3 is, there's kind of, like, a lull in the mid-game following the assassination attempt in Chapter 2. Basically, from there up until you get introduced to Kia, I mean, really, just the entirety of Chapter 3 is kind of a lull, but then that's when the Rin storyline really picks off. And that's like a great payoff, the thing with learning the truth about what happened to her and her parents, and how it was basically, it's all just kind of a misunderstanding, which I still think, I don't really have my thoughts fully fleshed out on this, but it is kind of odd, because I don't really understand Loe's dialogue at the end of Trails 3, if it is just all in a misunderstanding, because Loe does definitely seem to imply that, like, Rin's parents are like, they deserve to be killed, and it just surprises me that Loe wouldn't know the full story. Like, you know, like, if him having the context that the cult was kidnapping people, and I think this is maybe just, like, a consequence of, like, certain plot elements being made up after one another, but I definitely did, like, was fully expecting the Hayworths to be kind of, like, quote-unquote evil. Like, the idea, because, I mean, it's very much implied in Trails 3 that they sold Rin into slavery for, you know, whatever reason it may be. And because, I don't know. That's not really, like, a plot hole or a nitpick. I just do think it's kind of odd that Loe's, like, dialogue there when he's talking, because, you know, they show Rin as, like, and it's kind of implied that she's thinking about killing her parents, like, when she's watching them from afar, and then Loe's just like, they're not even worth it. Like, it's, you have to decide what it is you want to do in your life. Killing them isn't really going to, you know, you can do it, but think about whether or not that's even going to make you feel any better, is kind of the gist of what he says. But moving on to the end of Chapter 3 and the introduction of Kia. So this is something that, you know, it's probably my main plot criticism of Zero. Now, they do kind of explain this in Azure, as we'll talk about later. But I did think that, like, the gang got way too attached to Kia a little too fast. Like, not just in the sense that, like, oh, they like her and took over a protective role. Like, I can't remember the exact specific lines of dialogue and when they happen, but there's parts where, like, Lloyd and Ellie and I think even Tio kind of talk about how, like, Kia coming into their life, like, really helped make them, think about the world differently and stuff like that. And it's like, it just felt a little odd to have them be like, their worldview has changed so much by knowing Kia for like 2 weeks or something like that. And, you know, I do like the explanation for how they kind of come back and retroactively, like, explain this idea, in the sense that, like, Kia potentially kind of has, like, uncontrolled powers of persuasion, or coercion, where she can kind of, like, get people to like her. Now, you know, it's kind of vague, the exact specifics of how this power works or whatnot, but it is an interesting idea, and I do like that it kind of, that the game addresses that idea, and that instead of just kind of ignoring it. I do think the overall intermission with Kia is a good idea, though, since, getting attached to Kia is so important for the final chapter, and for, like, most of Azure. So kind of having just a downtime bit to walk around and talk to everyone is really good, even if it does kind of accelerate the feeling of like a mid-game slowdown, because I mean, the Shores auction stuff is exciting, but it doesn't really feel like you do all that much. I mean, you fight Garcia, but Garcia isn't really like that intimidating or anything. He's not like super cool and like well developed as a villain in the sense of some of the other characters you fight throughout the 2 games. So there is like a, you know, there's kind of like a lull in the mid game, and I think the intermission does kind of help accentuate that idea, especially because Chapter 4 is also pretty slow, but that makes sense, especially for the context of the chapter. I mean, it's called, what, like Creeping Gnosis? You know, so the idea is basically that, like, there's some shady shit happening, and, you know, you're kind of trying to figure out what the hell's going on, but it's happening real slow, right? The reveal of Yakum being evil is... I do like the way it kind of mirrors, in a sense, the reveal of Alba. Like, in this, you know, you're kind of having, like, a normal conversation, and then the music cuts out, and you have that, like, couple seconds, and you realize that, like, oh, Yakum's evil. You know what Dudley's about. He's about to reveal some shit that's gonna be very puzzling. Now, the only thing is that I do think Yakum is just, he's too similar to Wiseman. Like, it's just a little, it's a little too on the nose, the similarities there. Like, I mean, even just like the way he looks, his kind of introduction and whatnot. Because, I mean, literally, the first time we're introduced to Yakum, the first sentence I say is, this man has crazy, shady energy or something like that. I can't remember the exact way I phrased it, but I do know the first word I said about Yakum was in reference to the fact that he looked shady as hell, and then also connected to the fact that he's very visually similar to Wiseman. So I think that kind of made him being evil a little too obvious. But it's still a cool moment, nonetheless. Overall, the final chapter is really well done. It's actually pretty reminiscent of the final chapter of Trails in the Sky 1. Granted, I say that a lot. I say that about Azure as well, so maybe I need to come up with a better comparison. But it's just kind of like the way the tone and the stakes of the game increase so rapidly compared to what they were prior to that. Like, basically the whole idea that now the city is completely against the gang, and what this area that has been a safe haven through the entire game was now completely against Lloyd and friends, and it's now like this dangerous area that you can't even really explore. It's kind of like a neat flip on that idea. And it does feel like, you know, the gang's kind of going up against like suddenly pretty insurmountable odds. Like, they're facing off against like essentially like half of the Crossbell Guardian force, plus who are super powered via the drug, and all the Revanche mob members, plus all the demons and stuff that are in the Sun Fort. Which, I mean, granted, those are just kind of there naturally, I suppose, for reasons. Game balance, that's the answer. The Bond scenes are a cool idea. I do think they cause some problems. This is something we'll talk about more in regard to the Bond events in Azure, where I'll go into more detail on this idea. But I do like each of the scenes. The main power ranking, I mean, you already know. It's Randy, it's Tio, then it's Ellie at the bottom. I'm sorry, girl. I'm sorry, Ellie. I'm not sorry, actually. I mean, they're all good. The Ellie one, I do at least like. I do like that it sets up the romance stuff, which it does kind of feel like a payoff if you were to have done Ellie's Bond event in Azure, because I did kind of mention that I'm not super invested in any of the romances that are presented in Azure, but Ellie's is definitely the one that is most developed, and it feels like that's the one that they wanted to do initially, or like that's the one that they want people to pick, because it just does feel like it's far and away like the one that's most well fleshed out. Not really a huge fan of the final dungeon of the chapter. I think the Sun Fort is probably the second worst final dungeon in the series. Only Trails in the Sky 1 beats it out. Trails in the Sky 1's final dungeon is just like, I did all the monster chests. That's why I hate it, if you want to know. And it doesn't have, well, like, both dungeons kind of suffer from not having any cool boss fights to spice things up. Because, like, Trails 2 and Azure, for example, both have pretty tedious final dungeons, but you have cool boss fights to kind of break up the monotony and spice things up and give everything an extra level of tension prior to actually fighting the final boss. But yeah, so it's basically the Sun Fort is just kind of boring dungeon crawling. The main strength are the data logs. The data logs are fun to read and kind of try and piece together what's said there. That was kind of neat. Very, you know, kind of a throwback to the data logs you find in Trails 2. But granted, you can't actually get them. Like, I did like that in Trails 2, like, you find those data logs, and then by the time you get to the final chapter, you can actually read them. Whereas for Zero, you had to wait until basically the end of Azure to be able to actually know what the hell Yakum said. And at that point, it's kind of like, I don't really care as much anymore. We already know the answer to what Kia is and everything. So I feel like that was kind of an odd thing with the data logs, is that you don't actually know everything that's said until it's almost a little too late. Which, granted, then again, you don't want to have major plot points spoiled in the data log anyway. So, you know, it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Yakum as a final boss and villain was kind of underwhelming, which is honestly a bit of a trend in the Trails series, I would say. Generally, the final villains are not that good, and the final bosses as well. You know, Wiseman, he's not like a super well-developed villain. He's got like a degree of like chillingness to him. And Yakum in that sense is just kind of like a worse version of Wiseman. Kind of like I mean, Wiseman was a little crazy, but Yakum's more like flat out insane. Whereas Wiseman was more just kind of cruel and calculating. So it was just kind of hard to think of him as being like all that different than an already established villain from the Trail series. what was I saying? Oh yeah, and also, I mean, he's just like so similar gameplay wise. I mean, they both use stabs and summon stuff and whatnot. I don't know. I just, I wasn't, and then they turn into like a demon form after you beat their ass. It's just, it's a little too much of a rehash, so I wasn't too, big of a fan of Yakum as a final boss. I was a big fan of the final Ren scene, and that scene is basically fucking perfect, and it's definitely one of my favorite scenes in the entire series. Arguably my favorite. I flipped back and forth between them. For a while, this one was my favorite, but honestly, I still think the beach scene from Trails 2 is my favorite overall scene in the entire series. It's so good. And then the Randy scene in Azure is also, like, so good. Like, those are the three that kind of stand at the top to me. And there's a lot of other good honorable mentions that could also arguably be, like, considered the best scenes in the series. The ending itself is, it feels conclusive, but you also still have, like, a lot of questions that are unanswered, which is, cool. Because it kind of creates excitement for the next game without necessarily feeling like a cliffhanger or anything. Like, you don't feel like you're left in the lurch. No, I don't mean that as like a bad thing or anything. That's not supposed to be a subliminal shot at Trails 1, even though I did beat the game like 7 months before I could start the Trails 2 Let's Play, and it basically killed me inside. As we'll talk about here in a second when we get to Azure. Kind of. But that's basically it for Zero. Zero was my second favorite Trails game upon beating it. Trails 2 I still liked more. Zero's now my third favorite. I won't tell you which one I like more as my favorite, whether it's Zero or, I mean, whether it's Trails 2 or Azure. We'll maybe talk about that in about, I don't know, 4 hours when we get to the end of the Azure talking points. But I think that's it for Zero. I didn't have nearly as much to say about it because I don't remember as much in detail, like all the specifics and whatnot, and we talked about some of that stuff during the Azure Let's Play, so there's not too much point in, or I don't feel like as much of a need to revisit, the entire game, like, point by point, like we're kind of going to do for Azure. Trying to think, any other things worth mentioning? I don't think so. I think we're going to move on to Azure. What time we're at? Because that took 27 minutes. This is why I had such a, like, I got completely bamboozled on how long it was going to take to write the notes for this video. Because writing the notes for Zero is like 2 pages. And it took like, you know, 20-30 minutes. So I was like, okay, Azure will take like an hour and a half. It took like 3 fucking hours to write all this shit. But let's jump in. So, Trails to Azure. This one had like the longest break between the start and to the end of the previous Trails Let's Play and the start of the next one. It was what, I guess it was about 6 months. It also was the longest break for me in real time because I beat Zero in early October. The finale went up on Christmas 2020. So there was like a, you know, 2-month gap or like 2.5 month gap between beating the game and the finale actually going up because I was just uploading only 1 video a day and videos were shorter that series compared to Azure where I beat it like not even 2 weeks before the finale went up. So, but yeah, so I think from, it was what, so like 7-8 months from when I beat Zero to starting Azure and like 5 months for the Let's Play. So definitely the longest break. Previously, the longest break had been between Trails 1 and Trails 2, where Trails 1 I beat June 1st, 2019 and started the Let's Play in like early December, and then the Let's Play ended in August 2019 and started in like mid-December, I want to say. But that's enough of that. Let's jump into the actual meat, the game itself. So I think Azure has probably the best prologue in the series. At the very least, it's tied with Trails 2. The reason I think Azure wins out is that, unlike the Trails 2 prologue, which is pure suffering and pain, Azure is nice and fun and easy and breezy. I really like the idea of being reliant on Arios and Dudley for the combat. And I think that's something that could have been expanded on more with the guest characters, like basically having the guest characters be like really strong and you have to kind of build your party around them or try and enable them with everyone. like, it was a good way of, trying to think how to phrase this, of establishing, like, using the gameplay to reinforce the story. Like, in the sense of, you're not, like, you believe Arios and Dudley are stronger than you, not because the game tells you they're stronger, but because you're using them in combat, and you're like, yo dog, they're stronger than me. We have to use, like, we're relying on Arios and Dudley to carry our ass. Which is, like, a good way of using the gameplay to actually, demonstrate that difference in power and skill between Arios and Dudley and Noelle and Lloyd. I think that's really cool, and like something that I think, like an example of when I think it could have been used again was in the Azure wetland scene when you have Yin with you. Like, what if Yin was actually like significantly stronger than everyone else, and the boss fight was balanced around that idea of, like, you kind of have to use Yin, and Yin is the one carrying you, and it would actually let you potentially like fight Orion Road or even the Valkyries or something would be kind of cool. Like that would give you a better boss fight than just like a random chimera that shows up out of nowhere. So that's something that I think is a cool idea, to break up the combat so that it doesn't feel so samey. Like I just think it'd be a neat way to kind of have the gameplay reinforce the story, which is always a good thing and something I'm a big fan of. Like, an example of why I think it's good to have, like, the gameplay reinforce the story in that sense, like, one of my favorite examples I always like to use, because A, it's one that I think people are probably familiar with, and I think it's just a very good example, is in Final Fantasy VII, the flashback scene from the beginning of the game, when Cloud is talking about that mission he goes on with Sephiroth, and they get the player to respect Sephiroth as, like, a strong threat by basically just having him carry the shit out of Cloud during any and all combat, and like use the gameplay to actually demonstrate that Cloud is a complete dead weight on Sephiroth. And I think that's kind of an idea that could have been used more for some of the side characters in Trails. Like getting you to respect them by seeing them in combat and being like, yo dog, they're really freaking strong. And so it's kind of weird that they use that idea in the prologue and then never really revisit it. Granted, you don't really have you don't really use support characters that much until the end of the game, when granted by the end of the game you're probably actually like as strong as each of the support characters. Like, you know, you're definitely as strong as Dudley. You're really honestly probably about as strong as Yin. I mean, I don't want to get like bogged into like power level discussions, right? I think they're on like a surface level, they can be kind of neat in terms of like, oh, this character's about as strong as X, but like actually getting into like trying to definitively prove who would win in a fight, I don't have much interest in doing that. But so I try not to bring that idea up too much, but it is it's fun to think about. I kind of just like completely lost my train of thought, so I think we're gonna try and get back on topic and continue on with the beginning of Azure. I did really like Wazi and Noelle joining the SSS. I'm sorry, just had a sneeze. So I like the idea of Wazi and Noelle joining the SSS, and they felt like very natural additions to the main cast, partially because they're in a lot of Zero. Probably Noelle a little bit more than Wazi. I mean, Wazi's with you for Chapter 3. He's like actually part of your party, and then like maybe a little bit of the stuff in the main story, but for the most part, Wazi's more of like someone you talk to throughout the game, like as a random NPC rather than having like direct interactions with, as opposed to Noelle, who you work with on like 2 or 3 different occasions throughout Zero. So they felt like very natural extensions and additions to the party. They fit the group dynamic pretty well, where Wazi's kind of another goofy character, and Noelle counterbalances him by being serious, but also kind of having her own element of like comedy and fun in the way that she gets kind of flustered and easily teased. Very similar to Ellie in that regard, but like a bit more like down to earth, I guess. I mean, that's not really the right way to put it. I don't know. No, I don't really know how I would describe Noelle. I mean, I feel like she is kind of similar personality-wise to Ellie, in the sense that they're both kind of serious characters that do get like easily flustered, and they're a bit they're very genuine, I would suppose. But basically they just fit the group dynamic pretty well. Wazzy in particular, especially since Randy is temporarily out of the party, and chapter 1 would be pretty boring if we didn't have Wazzy to goof things up for us. That is another thing I kind of want to touch on for a second. I do actually really like the idea that you have to wait for the full SSS reunion, that Tio and Randy are not immediately added to the party. Because A, it kind of forces you to use Wazzy and Noelle and maybe kind of actually consider them, because it would be harder to be, it would be easy to just be like, if you had Randy, Tio, Ellie, and Lloyd from the start, it would be easy to just be like, well, I want to use the 4 characters that I'm attached to over the course of 0 and not try anything new. But because it forces you to, and that's kind of why Wazzy ended up getting, was like part of my main cast the entire time, because A, I like him, and he's definitely one of the weaker combat characters, but he's good enough that, well, honestly, he's good enough and the game is easy enough that it doesn't really matter. But like another reason why it's good is that it kind of helps create anticipation for the early game, because you know at any moment that Randy and Tio could like show up and you're kind of always looking out for that. It's similar to something that happens in Trails in the Sky 2, where a lot of the, because honestly, the beginning of, I just completely lost my train of thought. The beginning of Trails 2 is actually fairly slow, just like Trails in the Sky 1, but it's helped by the fact that like you have all this anticipation for going to like old locations and meeting new characters again, and you know that at any point, you know, any old character could show up, and there's also the tension between Estelle and Joshua, where you know at any point, you know, Joshua's going to show up. You don't know when it's going to happen, but it's going to happen, and you know it's going to be like a very dramatic moment. And on like a lighter scale or a smaller scale, that kind of happens in Azure with Randy and Tio. And that kind of helps carry you through, like, because the first chapter is actually pretty basic in terms of storytelling, like in terms of like what actually happens, but it's carried by the excitement of getting to meet old characters and getting to explore the city again and the environments. You have like all this like anticipation for like getting to see old areas again and see what's changed, or just talk to people and whatnot. So even though, because really all you do in chapter 1 is you kind of like explore some, and then you hear about there's some ruckus over at the mines, and then you go down in there and you basically get outmaneuvered and outsmarted by Red Constellation, and then Randy comes in and helps you fight the dragon thing. Like, not too much direct story stuff happens, but it doesn't feel slow-paced because of the fun there is in just exploring. The trend kind of continues on into chapter 2, where you're still, like, when chapter 2 is when, like, you get introduced, or you can explore, like, the outer areas of the city and whatnot. But it is aided by a stronger direct plot for the chapter, and the anticipation for the conference. Like, it's presented as being a very big event, and you're excited for it, so it kind of helps you push through the first few days of, like, setup, when, like, not too much is going on. Granted, yeah, and then you also do get to introduce into the other, like, original characters, which is really good. Like, I mean, getting to interact with Oliver again is great, because he's my boy. But even seeing Chloe again, I mean, Chloe and Oliver are, like, my 2 favorite characters from the original trilogy, probably. Oliver definitely is my favorite. Then it's like, I don't know, like, Chloe or Kevin would probably actually be second or third, not counting Estelle and Joshua. They're kind of like hard to count because they're like semi-main characters, but I mean, Estelle is the main character and Joshua is kind of like a, you know, semi-main character. But I kind of like, I went off on a tangent there and I don't know what I was talking about. But yeah, like chapter 2, you know, is also a little bit slow, but it doesn't, the pacing feels good because you know that you're building up to like a big event. And the conference itself is like really well done, and it's great to actually see all that geopolitical world building in the previous games like pay off, and you get to see the Blood and Iron Chancellor in action facing off against President Rocksmith and everything, and those negotiations is really cool. Because it's kind of something that like, it reminds me of the non-aggression treaty that's talked about in Trails 2. where it's mentioned a lot, but you never really, it just kind of gets signed off screen. Like, you don't ever get to experience the conference or anything like that. So it was kind of cool to actually get to see some of that political stuff on screen for the first time, really. The only real problem with Chapter 2 is that the actual conclusion is kind of lacking. The rebels themselves don't feel like a real threat. If anything, I still am completely baffled at why they thought their plan was going to work. And like, I really don't understand. Like, I'm still kind of under the impression that like Ouroborus like kind of lied to them and made them like gas them up so that they would attempt the assassination plan, because I do not know how they thought that shit was going to work. Yes, it's kind of also a problem, or something I talked about in the actual Let's Play, that because the rebels don't actually feel like a threat, and the SSS doesn't really contribute in any way to actually stopping them, or like preventing the plot, because basically the plot fails as soon as it started, pretty much. Like, it's a failure within like a couple minutes of them landing the aircraft. So it's almost like, why was the SSS like, it doesn't really feel like you had to be there, or like you had much of a role. Really, the only thing like plot important SSS does in Chapter 2 is like provide the knowledge that the rebels have access to the blueprints, so that security's beefed up. But at the same time, the security that was just going to be there in the first place was more than enough to deal with the rebel threat. Especially considering there was also Heiyu and Red Constellation waiting in the wings to cut off the escape of the rebels, so they were never really in any danger of getting away or anything like that. So, yeah, that is kind of a bit of an issue I have with Azure up until the final chapter, is that the SSS themselves and their actions don't have much of a direct role on the story. Like, in a sense, it's almost like even if they were just sitting at the building playing video games for the first 4 chapters, the story would play out exactly the same. Whereas in Zero, that was definitely not the case. For example, like if the SSS hadn't been on the up and up during Chapter 2, Mayor McDowell would have been assassinated, and who knows what could have happened. You know, the whole cult thing could have broken off way quicker. Crossbell would have like been unprepared for it and everything. Like, so that is one thing that I think is a bit of a backstep, is like the overall like the way the plot reacts to the main cast is, or it's not even really that. I'm trying to think how to phrase this, and not come across as like disingenuous. Like when you're experiencing a story, you want to feel like the main cast actually has like a reason for the things that you're doing. And in Azure, for the first 3 chapters, it doesn't really feel like anything you're doing matters. In the end, it feels like it matters at the time, but basically they kind of keep pulling the rug out from under you at the last second, and then it's like, it didn't actually matter, all that stuff you did. It was kind of gonna play out the exact same way anyway, which just kind of feels bad from like a story perspective. You could maybe argue that it's like realistic, but come on, man, it's a game where at the end a bunch of teenagers beat a god. It's not supposed to be realistic. You know? Now, then we move on to the intermission, which the intermission's like really good for like 2 different reasons. A, it's just a lot of fun. It's a fun sequence, but it also has like a real plot reason for existing, in the sense that establishes the moment when Mariabelle starts to, you know, be that whisper in Kia's ear in regard to getting her to accept becoming the Septirion of Zero. So it is kind of cool that it wasn't just fan service, it was fan service with a point, which is really cool. It's also like, I mean, just like the sheer number of scenes that are available during the Michelin Park stuff is crazy, because I mean, we spent like almost 2 hours, and we probably saw like maybe a fourth of the total scenes. Granted, I wasn't like, you know, trying to blast through them or anything, but it's still like, I mean, it took a long time. It would take a long time to see every single possible scene there. But I remember we saw, I don't remember. We saw pretty much all the fortune-telling ones. We only did a couple of the other events. So it was probably about a fourth of the overall scenes, I would say. So a ton of content there, which is really awesome. The Mario Bell foreshadowing is really interesting, and I kind of like the slight misdirection that was caused, at least to me personally, by Lloyd's dialogue during Mario Bell's side quest from the previous, at the end of Chapter 2, where you do the Blue Blanc side quest, where at the end of the quest, Lloyd mentions that, you know, last time they did the Blue Blanc stuff, the person who gave them the request was actually Blue Blanc in disguise, and Lloyd kind of wonders if maybe that's what it is with Mario Bell, and they just kind of laugh it off. And maybe I was reading too much into things, but that kind of gave me the impression that when Mario Bell says her super ominous dialogue at the end of the intermission to Kia, that I was like, was that supposed to have been Blue Blanc, like, pretending to be Mario Bell? Now, they do kind of disprove this idea, like, right afterwards, when Campanella is at the Ouroborus virtual reality meeting chamber, whatever you want to call it, where they're all talking. Because I think they do actually mention, I don't think I fully picked up on this at the time during the recording, but they say that Blue Blanc had, like, already left Crossbell. So I think that's supposed to be your hint that he was gone prior to the intermission and everything starting. But I was definitely under the impression for a little bit that that was a possibility, which kind of resulted in me suspecting Mario Bell less. So I was a bit more surprised when it actually was revealed that she was evil. Granted, as soon as Dieter was revealed as evil, which was right before he declared himself president, which was when I was like, yeah, this is like mega sus. I definitely should have been on to this dude earlier, probably. And then you kind of have to make the connection that, well, if he's evil, then Mario Bell has to be evil. When in reality, it was actually kind of the opposite, where Mario Bell was evil and Dieter was evil as a result, kind of. I mean, Dieter's not really... I mean, he's evil, or he's a bad dude, but whereas Mario Bell is just, like, completely unredeemably evil. Like, she has no real reason for the stuff that she does. Which is something we'll talk about when we get to the final chapter, but... So then we move on to Chapter 3, which is kind of a transitional chapter, especially at the start, where you're just kind of fighting cryptids. You do some interesting stuff, like you're learning about the Pleroma grass, which is kind of nice, but things don't actually really pick up until you do the train derailment sequence and you fight Wald in the forest. But even that kind of has its own problems, because fighting Wald in the forest is extremely unsatisfying, because A, his fight is extremely easy and then he just one-shots you in a cutscene, which sucks for like a lot of reasons. Biggest reason is A, it sucks to get one-shot in a cutscene, and B, it sucks because Wald's transformation feels like an unearned power-up. Like, he goes from being like basically a nobody that couldn't even beat up Lloyd back in the start of Zero. Like, he was as strong as Lloyd at the start of Zero, and then he transforms into a demon off screen and now can easily beat the entire SSS and, like, you know, not have any problems whatsoever. So that just feels bad. And then additionally, it also kind of sucks because I forgot what I was going to say. I didn't write it down and I had it in my head. 1 second. Alright, I remember. The reason why that sequence sucks where Wald beats you up is because it reinforces this idea that the SSS is not really doing anything in the story. Like, by that point in Chapter 3, the SSS has not actually beaten a strong enemy yet, or like even really accomplished anything that feels hard. Like, you fight a dragon at the end of Chapter 1, which is just kind of a random monster with no... I mean, it's not like a real dragon. Like compare it to the dragon fight in Trails 2, where that fight has a ton of hype behind it, right? Like, I mean, the dragon basically, like, defeats the entire, like, air force of the country. I mean, they you know, it's the entire air force is basically unable to capture this thing. And so when you go to fight the dragon, it feels really cool, because A, it's a freaking dragon, and B, because there's a lot of, like, storyline leading up to the fight, whereas when it happens in Trails 1, he just kind of pops up out of nowhere with no, lead up whatsoever. And then in Trails 2, at the end of it, your final boss is you fight an armored car. Okay, that doesn't really feel that cool. And then in Chapter 3, you fight like a couple of cryptids, which once again kind of have the same problem as the original cryptid fight in Chapter 1. So it just doesn't feel like you've kind of like fought anything cool. Whereas in Chapter 2, or by that point in Chapter 3 of Zero, you know, you've actually butted heads with the mob, which kind of feels cool, like in comparison to your power levels, right? You fight, it ends up only being a clone of Yin, but you do at least get to face off against Yin, kind of, even though they're taking you very, very easy. The fight feels cool nonetheless. And then when you fight Garcia at the end of Chapter 3, right? That fight, even though it's very easy, he is presented as being a strong foe, so beating him kind of feels good. And I just felt like in Azure, you didn't really have as much of that, at least not until much later in the game. Then you move on to the Azure wetland stuff, which is really cool. It's a very neat area, like it's visually nice looking. And you know, you get introduced to some major players from Ouroborus, like some of the first new Ouroborus members you've seen since, basically since like Trails 2, right? Yeah, I think that was the last time new Ouroborus members were introduced, unless I'm forgetting something. I mean, some of them were mentioned in Trails 3, but none were directly seen until then. Once again, the actual fight against the Chimera is it's underwhelming. It has the same problem with the first cryptid fight, where it just kind of pops up out of nowhere, and monster fights aren't really that hype unless the game gives them hype, as an example with the dragon fight in Chapter 5 of Trails 2, where that fight feels really cool because there's a bunch of effort put into making the fight seem cool. I think it would have been actually better if instead the boss fight was against Aryan Road's Valkyries, because there's effort put into hyping up the Valkyries when you get there, because you meet Lynn and Aeolia and they're like, we got our ass kicked by these Valkyrie chicks, like they're extremely strong, be careful. So having the SSS fight the Valkyries would be cool because it's like a strong opponent, and it would let you, like, it would kind of let that, like, establish that, like, hey, the SSS has gotten a lot stronger. Like, they're able to beat these foes, or at least fight into a standstill, these foes that beat up Lynn and Aeolia, who were, you know, presented as being really strong, both within the story itself and in their side quest, right? And you could even try and explain it as, well, they had Yin helping them out, so if you wanted to still have the SSS be weak, so to speak, you still have, like, a very logical plot explanation. So it's just like, let me fight something cool, you know? Don't make me fight just some random monster that pops up out of nowhere with no context. That's not cool. Then you move on to about, I think that's pretty much it for the Azure Wetlands. It's a neat scene, you know, some good foreshadowing and everything. Getting to meet the Aryan Road chick is cool, since there's been some yeah, there was a bit of work hyping her up previously, both in Azure and in the dialogue from Trails 3. You know, that final Star Door scene where you see all the Campanella talking to all the other Anguises and whatnot, and they basically kind of mention that Aryan Road, not by name, but like the 6th Anguis. I think that, you know, she's the 7th Anguis, I think. That the 7th Anguis is, like, you know, one of the strongest members of the organization. I did really like the sequence of Randy leaving at the end of Chapter 3. It's a bit out of nowhere, but I think it's really effective, and it leads to one of the best scenes in the entire series after you defeat Shirley, which also, just briefly touch on it, the Shirley fight kind of sucks. Not really, like, from a sense of the gameplay. I mean, the gameplay, it's a very easy fight. Shut up, I didn't die. It's like a very easy fight, and then it being presented as like Shirley easily kicks all of your asses, and you beating her doesn't even matter. Sucks. like a lot, and it kind of reinforces that idea I was talking about earlier, where nothing the SSS does actually matters in the storyline up to the final chapter. But the payoff is that you get the Randy heart-to-heart scene there, which is just so good. So good. I think one of the reasons it's so good, the musical transition from, I think the track is called A Barrier to Get Over, to Miss You is so well done. Like, just that flip between like two completely different tones there as the dialogue shifts in the wake of kind of Lloyd I'm gonna say laughing, because I think he does actually laugh at Randy's confession, but that makes it sound really bad, right? But it's as like the tone of the conversation shifts, that musical switch there just really sells the scene. And plus the Miss You track is just so good. And it kind of like, you know, and plus I was extra invested in it because, as I've said, not only do I think Randy's the best character in the Crossbell games, he is the best character, like, objectively. The amount of character development Randy gets in comparison to everyone else is crazy. Like, I lost my train of thought. But what we're talking about, Randy, is like he has so many scenes, right? He has the scene in, well, like, yeah, I mean, just like the whole, like, really the first few chapters of the game, like all the conflict with Red Constellation. The reason that's so interesting is because of Randy's relation to Red Constellation and the implications of what that relation means, right? Like, Randy just has like a super like interesting, complicated backstory that there's no real easy answer to a lot of the stuff that he goes through. He's not just presented as like this victim. He's kind of this, like, he has a degree of complicity in the things that he did as a Jaeger. Now, there's also some explanations for that, in the sense that he was a child soldier raised into it. So, like, you can really understand his own inner turmoil, right? Where he kind of has legitimate reasons to blame himself and kind of hate himself. But he also has legitimate reasons to, like, not beat himself up over it, right? Like, I just think Randy is just such a good and well done character in that sense. Like, because it's not just an example of, like, a character who had no choice beating themselves up over not having any choice. It's a character who did have a bit of a choice and didn't do the right thing for a long time. And how do they, you know, move on from that, right? And that's a really interesting conundrum that I think is done super well with Randy's character. And none of the other main party members get anything of that level in my mind. Especially in Azure. Like, Tio and Ellie do not get a scene anywhere near the level of this scene at the end of Chapter 3. Even Wazi and Noelle don't. I mean, the closest thing Wazi gets is his Bond event. Noelle doesn't. She has some dialogue after she, like, rejoins the team, where she kind of talks a bit about, like, her own inner turmoil over whether she should join the Defense Force or not. Like, she knew that what they were doing was wrong and not in the best interest of Crossbell, but how easy it was to kind of just go with the flow and not be the squeaky wheel, so to speak. Like, even though she knew in her heart she was doing the wrong thing, just like the coercive power of groupthink is kind of, that's a neat idea. But really, I just feel like none of the characters are on the level of Randy in terms of development, in both within Zero and especially within Azure. So, long story short, Randy's best boy, and if you disagree, you're wrong. Objectively. Proven via science and math. What are we doing? Oh yeah, I was just kind of talking about how Ellie and Tio actually feel kind of underdeveloped in comparison to Randy and also Wazi and Noelle, which it was actually a little disappointing, even though, I mean, Ellie I'm not like a huge fan of. Tio does have some like they have small scenes of development, but no like major like super memorable scenes with them as the focus. Like Randy does, and to a lesser extent Wazzy and Noelle. Tio does have one really good scene I do like at the start of the intermission, right when Lloyd is kind of down in the dumps about the outcome of the conference, and Tio kind of chose that initiative to actually be the one to cheer him up is really cool, and that's like a nice bit of like character growth from her regard, instead of it being Lloyd who is cheering her up like in some of the past events. It's her cheering Lloyd up, so that's like a nice like bit of semi-subtle character growth and development there, but neither of Ellie nor Tio get that like super awesome memorable scene that they both got in Zero. I mean, Tio got 2, right? She got the scene where she talks about Guy in chapter 3 or chapter 2, I can't remember, and then the scene in the hospital where she talks about her time being experimented on by the cult. What's next? Chapter 4. Yes, chapter 4 is a slight disappointment, at least at the start. I really like the way it starts, where you see Crossbell on fire, and then you see how the raid on Crossbell is playing out. Like, the Ilya scene is extremely shocking. I will admit I have some personal dislike over the idea of a fake out death. It did bother me less though, since they do leave it ambiguous whether or not she actually like how severe her injuries are, and the fact that she is injured is important for both her and Riksha's character arcs. So I can forgive a fake out death scene, even though I have like a personal distaste for them, because I feel like it's cheating in terms of storytelling, because it's like you get all the emotional impact of a death with none of the actual consequences. So I do think fake out deaths should be limited if they're going to be used, and that's really the only one, so it's fine. They're not really used that often, but I do have to express a little bit of distaste over it, because it is kind of emotionally manipulative in that sense. One thing I would have liked to see happen in Chapter 4 is like the SSS being more involved in the raid on Crossbell as a whole. Like, I was kind of thinking it was going to be you're gonna have to go to the various districts and fight off Red Constellation with the help of various party members, and instead it's just you fight Sigmund, but then your fight against Sigmund doesn't actually matter, because even if you beat him, he just kind of like walks away and blows up the bank and flies off in his airship laughing maniacally. And it's kind of like, why am I here? We could have stayed up in mines and eaten a stamina steak, dude. We didn't need to be here. So that's another kind of issue, right? Where the SSS doesn't feel like any of your actions matter. Like, if they never made it to Crossbell City, the raid on Crossbell plays out pretty much the exact same. Granted, I guess you can interfere in the newsroom, but that's an optional scene, so it doesn't count. And even then, it's not directly implied that they were going to be killed or anything. Granted, Grace may have gotten herself hurt because she's a crazy lady. See, the Sigmund fight, it's a fun one-time challenge. I don't necessarily want to see the mechanic revisited. The idea of like a strict like 5-minute real-time timer. I do think a turn counter would have fit the game better, because it does kind of suck to have to switch your brain over to putting in inputs as fast as possible, and it does kind of eliminate a lot of potential strategies that would have let you beat Sigmund just by doing like turn order stuff. Because like really there's only 2 ways I can think of beating Sigmund. The strat I originally tried to use, which is a proxy puppet like rushdown strat, which definitely would work. It's just not very consistent, and it requires a lot of like, you have to be appropriately leveled. Like, you need access to stamina stakes, and you need at least a level 4 force quartz on Lloyd, or like some sort of attacking quartz that's leveled up. Because I think we had level 3 on both Lloyd and Randy, And if they were both at level 4, we could have definitely won with like a physical damage based proxy puppet rushdown strat. It's just, it's a little too inconsistent without, because I didn't have access to food, you know, stamina stakes or any type of strength buffing food, and I didn't have access to those higher level master quartz. But that's a strat that works. And then there's the magic strat that I went for, just making use of the wind bell, whatever it's called. Saturn, I think it's called Saturn Bell. Like making use of that in relation to and then having like Lloyd try and like tank up the attacks and whatnot with proxy puppets to stay alive. Or I guess you could also maybe just use Adamantine Guard, but I refuse to use that spell. That's the one thing that I was like, that's the one overpowered mechanic I will abstain from using. I'll use Evasion because I think Evasion's fun, and I never really tried to completely break Evasion. Like well, there was a couple times we could have reached 100% Evasion. I just didn't do it because I didn't really want to do it. I felt like, you know, I was okay with breaking the game a little bit because I had a slight chip on my shoulder, like in terms of combat, like in regard to like how I performed in the first 2 Trails in the Sky games, and to a lesser extent Trails 3. So being able to kind of like break one of the games did feel nice, in that sense. So that was kind of part of the reason why I was okay with using some of the more overpowered mechanics, but didn't use all of them. And plus, a lot of it's just like, in terms of a Let's Play, I don't really want to like redo fights over and over again until I get the perfect RNG that lets me beat it without using, you know, X, Y, and Z overpowered mechanic. I don't really find that interesting. We might be trying that out though in some of the future games. Foreshadowing. The fast forward to Dieter becoming president afterwards is it's a mixed bag. On one hand, it's good because it being so fast like helps aid in the surprise, which is kind of the point. Like, you're supposed to be like really shocked that like it's like, oh my god, Crossbell's independent. Oh my god, we've are about to be invaded. Oh my god, Dieter's president. Like, it's supposed to have this super fast pace. But something that I think would have been cool as an alternative idea, just to kind of present it, is have the Independence Declaration, but then have another in-game day before Dieter declares himself president, and maybe even have a scene where you can go talk to Dieter and be like, yo dog, what's up? And he could actually maybe try and like reveal like why he did the Independence Declaration and stuff like that, and kind of talk through it. And maybe it could kind of assuage some suspicions that he is doing this for malicious purposes, so that then when it's actually revealed a bit later what his plan is in regards to abusing Kia's power to destroy any potential invasions and lock down Crossbell City under his own iron grip, that would be a bit more shocking, because the reveal of Dieter becoming president so quickly like just cements the idea that he's obviously like doesn't have the best interest of the state at heart, because what he's doing is so stupid from like on paper without the knowledge of Kia as a super weapon, which you don't have access to at that point. There are, you know, like I said, there's some benefits though in the fast pace of it, because it does send the player's mind racing for explanations and thinking of like, oh, why is this happening? Why could this be happening? You know, stuff like that. So like the way the game did it is very valid and maybe arguably even better than the alternative idea I offered, but I just kind of thought that was a neat idea and wanted to present it. I do have some beef though with the idea that the army supports Dieter. Like, my essential beef is that there's no reason for the military to believe that Dieter would be able to defend Crossbell because they have no knowledge of Kia and her powers. Nor is there any reason to believe that Dieter in any way alluded to him having a secret weapon. A, there's no textual evidence to support that idea, and B, it kind of goes against logical thinking. It's very much implied throughout the game that there's some sort of like leak or way for Erebonia and Calvard to obtain intelligence about what's going on in Crossbell, like both its military and its political side, as justified by the fact that Kalika and Lecter always know exactly what's going on, even the secret stuff in the state. Like, they have some level of access, like their respective intelligence agencies. So there's no reason for Dieter to allude in any way that he has a secret weapon that could, you know, potentially warn Erebonia and Calvard. Because the only way his plan works is if the invasion happens. And you wouldn't want to potentially have anyone within the military find out that your secret weapon is powered by, you know, a child, and you're having to, essentially, as far as it's presented at that point, like, you think that Kia is being exploited, like her power or whatever, which technically it's more that, you know, she's doing it willingly, but she is being kind of subtly manipulated into using her powers in that way. So with that knowledge, or without the knowledge of Kia, I should specify, because as far as it's presented, because once again, the player knows this and the audience knows this, but none of the characters within the military know about Kia or have any inkling of Dieter having a super secret plan to destroy Erebonia and Calvard. Without that knowledge, Dieter's independence declaration seems like sabotage. It seems like a dude who has become so overcome with his emotions in the wake of the raid on Crossbell, which at this point, you know, everyone does think that it was Erebonia who caused it, that the more logical assumption is that Dieter is overcome with his emotions. He's a rash politician, as it's been kind of presented in the past. He's so angry at this idea that he's willing to just declare independence and like throw it all away and do like these very rash actions that are going to guarantee, you know, freezing the IBC assets for Erebonia and Calvard. Like, he's guaranteeing that an invasion is going to happen. When throughout like the entire series up to this point, it's been very much pounded into our heads that the entire purpose of Crossbell's political and military system of government is to prevent invasions from happening. So why would they support the guy who seems to be trying to get the entire country into a war that is very much presented as something they cannot win? Because once again, let me clarify this, no one knows about Kia. So don't say, well, obviously they could defend themselves because they had Kia. No one knows that. No one but Dieter, Mariabel, and the SSS slightly know about that. So it doesn't make any sense really for the commander and basically everyone else, including Noel, to support the man who is doing his level best to get the country they love invaded. Like, the only reason Crossbell has managed to exist as a semi-sovereign nation up to this point is through diplomacy. So having some newly elected guy not only declare himself president, but try and go out of his way to get the country invaded, mega sus. Like, I just don't know why you would want to lend him any credibility. The only person who has any excuse for lending Dieter credibility is Arios, because he knows about the greater plan. And I mean, you could maybe make an argument that, and really my position's more focused on the military that shouldn't have supported him. Like, I can kind of understand the populace because Arios is very much a hero, right? And it's not uncommon for people to get a little too gassed up about how strong their country might actually be and stuff like that. You know, getting swelled up into patriotic pride. Now, the idea of, hey, just let me be president for a while, we'll definitely have democratic elections eventually, probably should have, you know, initiated a lot of red flags for everyone. But, because that kind of moves on to my next point, right? Like, by making Dieter a dictator, even if you believe that Dieter has, like, can magically prevent Crossbell from losing this war to Erebonia and Calvard, even though there's no evidence for you to think that yet, even if you believe with all your heart that Dieter's the man for the job, you're sacrificing the ideals of your country that even make it worth defending in the first place. Like, one of the things that's kind of made apparent throughout the whole final chapter, like, you know, under Dieter's Crossbell, so to speak, is that it's not that different from being an occupied state. You know, your freedoms are restricted, probably even more so than if you had been invaded by Erebony or Calvard. Because if the goal for Crossbell really was just to prevent a war at any cost, they should have peacefully integrated into one of the two nations a long time ago, right? And probably retained, like, maybe not some level of sovereignty, but the average life of the day-to-day citizens probably wouldn't change that much. You just have to put Erebonian Empire on your tax check instead of Calvard Mayor. Not Calvard Mayor, Crossbell Mayor. The reason Crossbells and Crossbellians are so adamant on staying independent, or staying, you know, quasi-independent, is because they believe that the unique structure and ideals of Crossbell are worth defending, and you're sacrificing that by letting Dieter be a dictator. You're essentially kind of sacrificing your freedoms for safety, which, if you cared enough to do that, then they should have joined Erebonia or Calvard a long time ago. So, basically, to kind of wrap it up, in some ways, as soon as Crossbell lets Dieter take over, Crossbell ceases to be Crossbell. It kind of loses its sense of identity in that sense, and like what makes it worth protecting, which is one of the reasons why I was so annoyed at Noelle's character siding with the Defense Force. They do kind of explain it, that she feels this deep sense of, like, because of the way her dad died, that she kind of feels this deep duty to defending Crossbell. But she's not defending Crossbell at that point. Like, Crossbell as like an idea, as a concept, which is what's important in a nation state. Land is land, right? Whoever, you know, whether Crossbell is taken over by Erebony or Calvard really would only change whose taxes, you know, your money goes to, essentially, for like the average person. The reason they want to defend Crossbell is for like a more ideological, pure reason, that they want to feel different. And by letting Dieter take over, you're no longer different. Basically, I guess. That's kind of the long-winded, not that well spoken way of saying it. I did like, just to kind of move on from that part, I don't think there's anything else I really want to touch on. I don't know if that made any sense. If it didn't, I can maybe try and badly explain it in a comment instead of badly explaining it with my voice. I like the whole sequence that ends Chapter 4. The, you know, going to fight at Michelin is pretty funny. And just, like, well done. Honestly, now I think about it, there's a lot of combat at Michelin throughout the series. Michelin is not a very fun place. You fight mobs in Zero, you fight fog monsters in Azure, you fight a bunch of demons in the castle area in Azure, you fight a bunch of Jaegers at the end of Azure. Michelin, not a fun place to go. Don't go there. Boycott Michelin, it's too dangerous. But yeah, that whole sequence is good, except the Arios fight could have been done a lot better. In particular, the resolution. The reason why I think that this instance is probably the most egregious of the two games, of the game kind of no-selling your victory, there's no reason for Arios to one-shot the party in the cutscene the way it happens when you beat him, because you could very easily tweak that scene and still have it make complete plot sense, but still let the player feel good about beating Arios, at least to a degree, is just frame it slightly different, so that instead of Arios teleporting behind you, Nothing Personnel Kid, and killing you, it's that you fight Arios to kind of a standstill. After a period of time, you're both pretty much, you know, still standing, still ready to fight, but then Noelle and the rest of the military shows up. And then it's like, okay, well, obviously you can't fight, you know, like 12 soldiers, Noelle, and Arios at the same time. So it's like, the story still continues the same. It's just you don't get your pride shat on, and Arios doesn't get to feel like a Mary Sue because he's so strong and he can't be defeated, you know? That's something we'll touch on more when we get to Arios and how my perception on him has changed throughout the games. And my opinion on Arios is very different than what it was when I actually finished recording the game, and it might actually surprise you what I think about him. Foreshadowing. But yeah, that's kind of, it's just the cutscene when it feels cheap and it kind of robs you of feeling good about your victory over Arios, especially since it's apparently supposed to be a losable fight. So since it's supposed to be a fight that's like hard enough that you can lose it, you would think winning it would get you a slightly better reward than just getting one shot in a cutscene, you know? The time skip in the prison section that they're like before you get to the Fragments chapter, I think it could have been done a little bit better. One thing that I think would have been cool would have been to have all that information that's presented in that, like, you know, text dump right at the start of the Fragments chapter, where it's like, you know, it's been a month, Erebony and Calvert have been repelled, and Dieter is planning on creating like a global continental country, basically, with like Crossbell at the helm. It would have made more sense to, or it would have been cooler, I should say, if that information was kind of presented over time as something that Lloyd kind of slowly learns. Like, maybe he like overhears guards talking, and, you know, he hears about like, oh, you know, Erebonia sent in another division and was repelled, or, you know, oh, Dieter sent out a address or telling other countries to submit under Crossbellian sovereignty, stuff like that, and have that be presented as like multiple different smaller scenes, and that would kind of show the passage of time a bit more naturally, and not have the thing just be like Lloyd's been sitting on his cot for a month and then he suddenly decides to leave after talking to Garcia for 2 seconds. I think that would be better. But overall, the Fragments chapter is really well done. The prison escape section is great. I like both like the change in pace for the gameplay, in the sense that, like, you know, you're kind of, it's just a little bit different of a gameplay section. And, you know, what about that music though? It's so good. I mean, having frickin' Inevitable Struggle blaring the entire time is great. I'm so glad that track gets the respect it deserves in Azure, because I think it's like genuinely one of the best JRPG battle tracks like ever. It's just, I mean, especially, and the Azure version of it's like super good as well. Like, it's like even better than the original, and the original was, you know, crazy good as in the first place. I liked the little sequence with Zeit as well, his story about the Septirion of Mirage. It's both interesting, but also it kind of has those very chilling undertones, with the implications that Kia is supposed to be the recreation of the Septirion of Mirage, and the original Septirion like willed themselves out of existence, and you kind of have to wonder, like, are they gonna, you know, is that gonna happen again? Which apparently kind of slightly does, if you mess up the boss fight of the, you know, the final boss. I am a little disappointed that I didn't figure out the that Wazi was a Grail Knight sooner. I can't remember when exactly it was that I figured it out. I know it was right before they revealed it, which is kind of like a running trend for me. I tend to always figure out plot twists about 7 seconds before they're actually revealed. Which, I mean, I guess on one hand, it's good that I've figured them out usually before they're revealed, but sometimes you like to figure that stuff out earlier. And then there's some exceptions. Sometimes I'm genuinely like blindsided by stuff, but I still don't understand what the hell Randy's hint about Wazi was supposed to mean back at the end of chapter 3 when he's leaving to go on his own. He has some line about how Wazi smells like some people he used to know from back in the day. I don't really know what the implication there is. Is the implication that the Red Constellation like clashed with the Grail Knights at some point or something like that? Or, I mean, because it couldn't have been, because I mean, it is also possible that I guess the Red Constellation had like activities near Wazi's village that's revealed in Wazi's Bond event, but that's in a different country. I can't remember where exactly Wazi's supposed to be from. It's not Northumbria, I don't think. I can't remember, but it's not Erebonia, I want to say. It's like some other, like one of the other minor countries that's mentioned not nearly as much as the major ones. I do like the overall like final idea of the final chapter is really good. Like the whole revisiting all the old areas and rebuilding your team slowly. and before eventually launching an assault on the actual city of Crossbell itself. Just really fun. The final chapter is when it really starts to feel like, for the first time in the game, that the SSS's actions are really important and they're playing an active role in the story. Like, and this is kind of a point that I already talked about previously, but like, so many of your previous events in the story play out exactly the same, even if the SSS had been sitting at home eating hot pot. Like, the conference, they didn't have to be there, plays out the same. Raid on Crossbell, they could have stayed at Mines. Saving Kia, when, if they hadn't gone to save Kia, it would have been better off, because, they wouldn't be in prison. Probably, maybe. I mean, I would assume they would have arrested Lloyd if nothing else, but still, regardless of, what had happened, like, even if they hadn't been there to be arrested by the military. Even then, like, come on, like, what even, do they ever say what the hell Lloyd is actually charged with that lets him be arrested? That's like another kind of example of what I'm talking about in terms of like Crossbell sacrificing its identity. Like, the military, within a day of being formed under Dieter already has them performing like illegal actions, like jailing dissidents for no reason whatsoever. Like, you know, none of the SSS members break any law, yet Lloyd is imprisoned, and it's implied, or it's stated Randy is also in prison, just somewhere else, I want to say. I can't really remember. And then the other members aren't imprisoned, they're just, you know, like under house arrest, which is just fancy prison, basically. I did like the Aryan Road, or the Campanella fights. It felt really cool to actually have the SSS face off against Ouroborus for the first time, and each fight was cool from a story perspective. Campanella was nice because it felt cool to actually finally like see him in combat for like the first real time, and his fight, like, it's an amazing example of like theming his abilities after his personality. Like the fact that he kind of like literally just like breaks the rules of the game and even invents new status effects like turning people into peppers. It's really, really good from like a thematic standpoint. And the way his fight is almost like a puzzle where you're not even entirely sure how some of the mechanics work until you experience them for the first time. Like when he turns all wavy and you're like, I don't know what that means. Because I thought it meant he had like 100% evasion, but it just means that it's like Luciola's ability from her final fight in Trails 2, where if she gets attacked, she teleports in one of your other party members. But then the Aryan Road fight was definitely more straightforward from a gameplay perspective, and she's actually like really easy if you use Tio's ultimate or any sort of craft guard stuff. But the theming of her character makes the fight feel really cool, even though it actually is like secretly easy. It doesn't feel easy because you're told she's super strong and she does a lot of damage, but as long as you can pretty consistently keep your guards up, you're not really in that much danger ever. Then we move on to the Bond events, which I talked about the Bonds events a lot, so I'm not really going to go into each specific one as much. There is one overall theme for some of the Bond events that I'm going to kind of talk about in detail here a little bit. So just like raw rankings, I think they're pretty much the exact same as what I said in the video, or in one of the videos where I talked about this stuff. Randy at the top. Randy's my boy. I've already talked about how he's like easily the best character in the entire 2 games, like in terms of development, personality. Well, personality is subjective, but he has by far the most development of all the characters. Then Riksha, just because I think, you know, Riksha gets a bonus for me because her backstory is kind of interesting and unique, and you don't really know very much about it if you don't do her Bond event. Same for Wazi, which is why Wazi's number 3. Then Noelle at number 4, which is maybe a little surprising because I've not really shown too much love for Noelle over time. Then Tio, and then Ellie. Now the reason Noelle is actually above Tio and Ellie has to do with the idea of romance which is what's something that let's get into real quick. And by real quick, I mean lot quick, because it's like a page and a half of notes. So basically, the romance stuff in this game is a half measure, and I think overall pretty ineffective. By trying to let there be 4 potential romances, none of them really feel all that well fleshed out, especially, oh god, it's burped. Blame the water. Especially in comparison to the Estelle and Joshua relationship, Evan and the Kevin Riez relationship from the previous games. Like, one of the biggest things that stuck out to me in all of the romantic scenes, like throughout the game, with the exception of the Bond events, which are the only real exception to this rule, whenever Noelle, Ellie, and Tio, and Riksha to a much lesser extent, show any sort of affection for Lloyd, Lloyd is never able to really reciprocate, because those romances are only made canon, or not really canon, but like, they can only really be officiated once the player makes their Bond event decision. So prior to that, Lloyd is never able to be like, to have his own kind of sense of self in regard to how he feels to all these characters. Like, you don't have any scenes where Lloyd is like coming to terms with his feelings or trying to understand why he feels this way for a certain character. Whereas you see that a lot in Trails in the Sky 1 and 2 in regard to Estelle, which is why the Estelle-Joshua relationship feels so strong. Because you get to see that as the game progresses, the way she comes to grips with her feelings for Joshua and the way she struggles with it is a huge defining element of the story and her overall character arc. I mean, there's way more scenes where you can see Estelle like actually coming to terms with the way she feels in Trails 1 and 2. You know, like starting with like the windmill scene in chapter 2 of Trails 1, where she kind of like first kind of realizes that she thinks about Joshua not just as like a brother slash childhood friend character. Yeah, this is like completely off topic, but I'm gonna offer a defense for something that I see mentioned every once in a while from like maybe like anytime I see this game or see Trails 1 mentioned like online, there's always a caveat about how the Estelle-Joshua relationship is like incest, which it's not. And let's go into this real quick. I have no notes for this, so this is going to be a little weird. The reason they like the Estelle-Joshua relationship isn't weird because it's honestly not that much different than it just being like a childhood friend trope. The only real difference is that they do refer to each other as brother and sister, but the reason it's such a big deal, like it's important that Joshua thinks of Estelle as his sister and Cassius as his father, is because Joshua has huge family issues, right? Like, he feels very abandoned and isolated, and part of his rehabilitation with the Brights is getting him to understand that he's not alone in the world. That's why it's important that he has a feeling of family and kinship with Estelle and Cassius, so that he can kind of come to terms with the fact that even though his sister is dead and he is, you know, doesn't have any actual biological family anymore, he's not alone in the world. He can find new people to become family with, right? So that's why it's important that, or that's why, you know, they have to call Joshua Estelle's brother and stuff like that. And once they actually enter into a relationship, that aspect is no longer important. Like, once on that beach scene when Joshua is able to finally come to terms with the fact that, like, with the death of his sister, and that he doesn't have to be alone and isolated in the world anymore, the familial aspect between Estelle and Joshua is no longer as important, and then they can enter into like a truly romantic sense. I don't know, that's just something I want to talk about for a while and have never really had the chance to. I kind of meant to mention it in my original Trails in the Sky trilogy discussion video, but I think I just completely forgot. But it's actually like very important that Joshua thinks of Estelle as his family at first, and then the fact that they changed that to where he no longer has to think of her as his sister is also very important for his character and his real rehabilitation and recovering from his own personal trauma. Weird tangent. I don't know if that made any sense, but yeah, basically those scenes like that, like the windmill scene in Trails 1, all of Estelle's scenes with Kevin in Trails 2, where she's like breaking down, like the very first time she meets Kevin on the airship returning from the prologue, the harmonica scene both on the dock in Trails 2 and the dream sequence involving the harmonica during like Luciola's dream sequence, where, you know, the harmonica is like the thing that lets her get out of the dream world, because she remembers that there's someone important to her that is not here in the dream world, and so therefore it's not the real world, and ultimately culminating in the beach scene, as I call it. There's nothing on that level between any of the romantic characters and Lloyd. Like, yeah, they each have like some important scenes where like Ellie talks about, you know, her divorce in regards to her parents, or Tio opens up about being saved by Guy, or Riksha talking to Lloyd during the intermission, but there's no level of Lloyd being integrated in those scenes in a romantic sense in the same way that Estelle is integrated into those scenes between her and Joshua, or those scenes that regard Joshua. So it's just because of that, because there's not as, like, the romance angle isn't as integrated into the story and feels more like an afterthought, it's really hard for me to buy this idea of these characters being in love and staying together forever, when there's only actually been a couple of romantic scenes per character, and a lot of them are like optional or feel disconnected or isolated from the overall story. Like, yeah, you know, you can pick some of the characters for like Bond event type stuff, and there might be like a slight romantic undertone there, but they're optional at the end of the day and not integrated into the story. So when it becomes time for the Bond event and Lloyd, you know, all of them, you know, Tio and Ellie's especially, express this idea that they're like going to be together forever. Ellie's is most direct in it, where they actually, you know, say they love you and everything, and kiss and all that. Tio's is more subtle, which, granted, I don't even like the idea of Tio having a romance angle to her relationship in the first place, because I think the age gap is weird and gross. The one thing I will give Noelle's is that I like how Noelle's romance scene is framed more as a, hey, let's start something. Like, you know, we kind of like each other. Let's, when this is all over, let's try and see if this will work out. They're starting from the beginning, as opposed to, hey, let's stay together and live forever, happily ever after, even though we've not had that many direct scenes in game, right? I mean, you could also make an argument that, yes, you know, take Ellie or Tio, for example. Lloyd has known them for like a year at this point. There is a lot of like off-screen characterization that probably happens in events between them, but once again, that's off-screen, and I'm talking about in regard to how the story itself is presented. So basically, I just think I'm trying to think what's the best way to phrase this. Well, let me just start this thought over. Basically, my beef is that Lloyd doesn't like the potential love interest because his character is written to like them. He likes them because the character picks them as their favorite, and that just makes the relationship feel not that believable, because Lloyd himself is, despite having a strong personality as that's presented throughout the game with his own thoughts and feelings, feels like he's being overridden by the player, which that can work in some games, like say like a CRPG or something, where you're role-playing a character, where, you know, the character's decisions are things that, and like their thoughts and motivations are things that the player comes up with. But in a game with a written, predetermined character, it feels kind of weird to have their own sense of agency overwritten by the player in that regard. If that makes any sense whatsoever. Also, I don't buy them because I'm highly skeptical that the game is actually going to respect any of your decisions going forward. That's like the meta reason I didn't want to do any of the romance stuff, is because I'm pretty sure what's either going to happen is they're going to dance around the idea that Lloyd's supposed to be in a relationship with any of these 4 characters and like never fully acknowledge it, or they're just going to be like, actually the canon choice is Ellie. You know? Like, I know one of those 2 options are what's going to happen. I don't really think, or third option, they do actually like have like a save import thing where they respect your decision if Lloyd and whoever show back up again on the same time. But the explanations are not going to be all that well done in comparison to like a set concrete relationship like Kevin and Riaz and Estelle and Joshua, where you don't have to like play around with the fact that Estelle could have potentially been with like 3 different other characters or something. It's always Estelle and Joshua. It's a much easier way to write and reintroduce the characters in that regard. So that's kind of the meta reason why I don't like the romances. What else is there? Oh yeah. So I think that's it on the romance front, I want to say, if that made any sense. And you know, we did have that weird tangent about Trails in the Sky 1 there for a little bit, but the payoff for the Nielsen scenes is also really cool. And the investigations you do within Crossbell City, you know, going to talk to Pete or checking out the agency, the Grimwood agency. Now, there is I don't really like how Nielsen the first time is so easy to miss. Granted, I guess he's actually easy to miss in the third time too. The second time is the only time that I think he's easy to be found. Which is actually funny because that's the only time I was actually directly told where to find him. Because like the first and third times, I found him on my own. I was told to look out for Nielsen in Chapter 1, so that's like the reason I was able to find him. If I hadn't been told that like, hey, it's important you talk to this guy in Chapter 1, I probably would have missed him. Just because I wouldn't have gone back into the library in a sense of like, because I wouldn't have checked to make sure that he hadn't popped up back up after you doing that scene with where they told you to go to mines or go to the mine or whatever. But yeah, like Nielsen being so easy to miss does kind of suck, but the payoff for the scenes and this idea that the plot twist is integrated into the game mechanics and it's something that the characters themselves can figure out, not just the player, is really cool. It's like a very unique idea that I can't really think of any other examples I've seen within games that are done kind of the same way here. Like the idea that like there's an optional piece of storytelling that can be found, and it's not just important for, it's not just foreshadowing for the player, but it's foreshadowing for the characters themselves. And then the idea that the characters learn that information ahead of time is actually represented within the story is really cool. I did also enjoy the return of Rin, and the way it kind of brings her character arc to a conclusion. The scene of Potter Mater passing is really well done, and I also really like the way that scene kind of represents Rin's last ties to Ouroborus being done away with. She's now at this point fully free of Ouroborus, and in a way her losing Potter Mater has this kind of metaphorical sense of she no longer needs that artificial family that Potter Mater kind of represented, because she has Estelle and Joshua now, and potentially, you know, one of these days we'll maybe have a real biological family as well, once it's time for that. So I thought that scene was just really cool. Like, I mean, obviously it's very sad, right? Like the way it's done and the way Potter Mater, like, you know, passes. But there's something kind of, I think, a little beautiful in that idea that Rin no longer needs Potter Mater to be her artificial father and mother, right? Because she has her own family now. Her own real family. I also like the bait and switch with Dieter at the top of Orkio's tower and the whole introduction of the final dungeon. It just created this like odd sense of foreboding as you climb the tower and you realize that none of the people you thought you were going to fight are there. And so you're like, you come to the conclusion that you're like, well, I know the game can't be ending, but like, what's going on, dude? What am I doing? And then it's, you know, revealed that Dieter isn't actually the big bad. It's Mario. Well, it's Grimwood and Mariabell, but really Mariabell. Even Grimwood, the manipulator, is basically being manipulated by Mariabell behind his back, which is kind of interesting, I suppose. It's like a triple cross at the end of the day. I did also, I mean, I liked the way that it doesn't just throw you into the final dungeon, that you get one last chance to completely explore Crossbell and talk to every single person you want to talk to again. Like, it's kind of a way of doing a final send-off, which is really neat, especially since the game ends so suddenly. Like, as soon as you beat the final boss, there's like a quick little, you have the Kia scene, and then after that the game's over, like, you know, 5 minutes later, and there's no, like, you know, extended wrap-up or anything. Like, I mean, really the only game that does that is Trails 1. And to a much lesser extent, Trails 3, with the kind of like, you know, goodbye scene as everyone returns back to the real world. But, you know, because Trails 2 and 0 both also end pretty abruptly. So it was kind of nice to kind of be able to go around and talk to everyone again before you head out. The actual final dungeon is a bit of a mixed bag. I think I kind of talked about this a little bit earlier when we were talking about the 0 final dungeon, but basically it's a little too long, definitely. It is aided by the fact that it has some really cool boss fights throughout. You know, getting to refight Shirley, put her in her place, fighting Sigmund, of course fighting Arios at the end. The walled fight's kind of like whatever. I don't really care about beating you up. The scene itself with Wald is pretty good though, with Wazi doing his super Shoryuken on him. And I do like the whole, like, the sequence where Wazi unleashes his full power and switches his nameplate, changes over to Dominion Wazi is really cool. I like that. But the actual going through the dungeon itself sucks. I do also, speaking of the mini bosses, I like how they had their own themed little mini dungeons that give insight into their inner mindset. You know, you can kind of see the turmoil within Wald's mind, the just raging battle lust of Sigmund, the oddly peaceful mind of Shirley, and then Arios's, I don't know, I didn't really think of like what theme they were going for with the gates. I feel like there's something there, but I just can't think of it off the top of my head. I don't know. I want to think on this for like 2 seconds. Can I come up with a thematic explanation for why there's gates? Kind of, actually. I think I kind of can. It has to do with the idea that like Arios has maybe locked his own guilt deep within himself. As something we'll talk about when we get to Arios' boss fight and the scenes that result from it. Yeah, I kind of like that interpretation. The idea that Arios, the keys and the gates represent all the kind of deep-seated guilt and inner turmoil Arios feels over both his involvement in Guy's death and just his involvement in Mariabell and Grimwood's plan. Yeah, like the actual boss fights themselves, I don't really have too much to say, except for Arios, who I have a lot to say about. Well, I will mention on Shirley real quick. I liked Riksha's speech before she fights Shirley. I liked the way it kind of underlined Riksha's own character development and showcased her resolve to live as her own person, instead of just kind of living this false existence as the shadow of Yin, pretty much. I thought that was really good, and it just kind of showed her own depth as a character. Wald's kind of a mixed bag. I like the idea of a character being like consumed by an inferiority complex, but I don't really like evolved that much personality-wise, nor do I feel like the actions he does in the game in any way justify, or in any way justified by, Wazi's slighting him by basically kind of leaving him behind and then never really taking him seriously in the first place. Shirley, I don't like Shirley, man. I don't like her personality. I don't really think her character is developed that well. She's pretty shallow, and I don't like the trope she personifies. I don't really like murderous anime teenager girl. I mean, I didn't, it's part of the reason why I didn't like Ren at first. I didn't start to like Ren really until Trails 3, I don't think. It's just not an anime trope I'm a big fan of. And then we move on to Arios. Oh boy. Let's pause for a second, and I'm gonna collect my thoughts and get some water. So, alright. It's time to say it. Arios is the second best character in the entire game, and I kind of hate saying it. Arios is such a odd character to me. The way my perception on him has completely changed with time. Initially, I was an Arios hater. I was not an Arios stan. I was not really a big fan of him. I felt like he was too much of a quote-unquote perfect character, and I kind of started to resent him after he kept showing up and saving us in combat in Zero, and he kind of felt like he had no flaws. He was this semi-perfect character. That's the way he's presented for all of Zero and most of Azure. I basically still had slight disdain for him throughout Azure. Not like dislike or anything like that. I just was like, I don't really like that Arios guy. But once he becomes secretary, then I switched to open dislike. I just couldn't believe that he would exploit a little girl to get revenge for his wife. And it felt like he had crossed a line. And I also still disliked how the game kept him on this pedestal in terms of strength, i.e., we're not actually going to let you beat Arios or even fight him to a standstill. He has to one-shot you in a cutscene because nothing personnel kid. Just didn't really like him. I was skeptical over whether or not he had actually killed Guy, even after his confession. I think I've mentioned this, but like the way he phrases, because he kind of like pauses, thinks to himself, and then says, "Yes, I suppose that's right," or something like that, or "Yes, that's right." It's almost like he's just now kind of realizing it for himself. That, he is the one who killed Guy, that's kind of what I thought in my head. So I was like, okay, he was involved in his death, but he didn't actually murder him, which ends up pretty much being the explanation. But and I still disliked him even after watching the initial scenes in his boss fight after he tells the story of Guy's death. It wasn't until sometime later when I was editing that video, I happened to just kind of rewatch the scene again, because, when my editing is I do audio editing, right? That's really it, and occasionally I'll cut stuff out, like very rarely, if I have to. So I was rewatching that scene after, editing the audio, and then I kind of started to notice, like, how good of a character Arios actually is. Arios is fundamentally a man whose grief was exploited to get him to participate in a plan that he didn't fully understand, and he was then trapped within that plan because he couldn't come clean, or else doing so would doom his daughter. With his dying breath, Guy still had faith in Arios, and it's very much presented as Arios never actually had the resolve to kill Guy. If Grimwood hadn't have intervened, I think it's pretty much, like, you can imply that Arios was going to back down. Like, he did not have the actual resolve to murder his best friend. But once Guy was killed, though, Arios is stuck in the plan. he can't come clean anymore, because if he did so, he would definitely be arrested for, you know, accessory to murder, if nothing else, probably just outright, you know, murder as well. And that would mean that his daughter, Shizuku, like, it's never directly stated, but I think it's implied that the reason Shizuku is able to get these expensive, like, experimental treatments is because Arios is funding it with his bracer money. So, and then even if that's not the case, if, you know, healthcare is all completely free in Crossbell, Shizuku, who knows what happened to Shizuku? You know, she doesn't have any family, it's presented. I mean, I don't know. I mean, obviously she doesn't have a mother, but it's not really presented if there's anyone else, any other family that she has in Crossbell. Like if Arios has any, like, uncles or stuff like that, or like a dad or anything. That's never really addressed. I think you can assume the answer is no, because you never see anyone. And you would think if there was any family that was available, they would occasionally look over Shizuku, since Arios can't be there 24/7 because of his job. So basically, Shizuku would definitely have to go to like some sort of orphanage or something. And then, very literally, she would never be able to see her dad again, because the only way she has any chance of getting her eyesight back is through these medical treatments that Arios is funding with his bracer money. And additionally, exposing the plot would mean that Guy died for nothing. And in a way, at least you could kind of explain Guy's death to yourself as like, well, it's for a greater good. It's for a free and independent Crossbell, and to ensure that nothing ever happens to, you know, the same event that happened to Saya is never going to happen to anyone else again. No one else in Crossbell is going to be killed as a result of proxy warfare by or other nations. Like, you're going to get revenge for her and all the others that were hurt. But if you reveal the plan, then it's basically kind of like Guy died for nothing. And additionally, I kind of mentioned earlier that I saw Arios as like this quote-unquote perfect character, and really that perfection is just a facade. Like, the actual man within is fundamentally broken, and he's carrying an immense weight of guilt. And another explanation for his actions, right, is, while at first I thought that Kia was being forced into using her powers or completely manipulated, they do at least explain that she's getting her own benefit out of using her powers and bringing back Lloyd and the rest of the SSS. Another kind of aspect that this is pure speculation on this point, but there actually is some evidence for it. I don't think Arios knew Kia was human until it was too late. Based on the way Mariabell talks about Kia, and considering Mariabell is the one who tells Arios about Kia, I'm pretty sure Mariabell explained Kia's existence to Arios as a doll, as a homunculus, like, not as a human being, which fits in with Mariabell's like personality and her view of Kia, because she views Kia as a tool that is her birthright, as opposed to a, you know, sentient human being that just wasn't born normally, right? And my evidence to support this is when Arios meets Kia for the first time, he's like really surprised, actually, because I'll rewatch the scene, or, you know, I looked up my video where we see that, and the dialogue that plays out is, it's when Kia is playing with Shizuku outside of the hospital. Arios walks up. He has like a pained expression, and he asks, "Is that the girl?" And then Lloyd says, "Yes, her name is Kia." And then Arios has another pained expression, a ... And then he tells Lloyd and Randy to take care of her until the bitter end. Like, it's almost like he is just now realizing for himself that Kia's a real girl, that she's not just a emotionless doll that can be used as a tool to defeat Ereboni and Calvard. She's a sentient person. And so in that sense, you know, Arios is a bit of a victim, right? Now, you can blame him for listening to Mariabell, because have you seen how she dresses, dude? Why would you listen to a thing that frickin' witch says? But yeah, like, Arios's character arc like that revelation that he isn't actually a perfect character, that's all just been a facade, and deep down he never really expresses it openly, but I think it's very much implied that he's kind of crushed under the weight of this guilt in regard to Guy's death, and he's trapped in this plot. So like, even if he wanted a way out, he has no real way out without potentially destroying his relationship with his daughter, which is very clear that's the most important thing in his life. So basically, I don't know, I've kind of come to really respect Arios's character, which is strange in a way, I suppose, since I was definitely a hater. And then I guess we need to move on to the actual end of the game. So the reveal that Kia made her decision on her own is so good. Like, it's hard to sum up how good of a twist that is. Like, I think the thing that gets me the most is not only is it such a great explanation for why Kia is using her powers and teaming up with Grimwood and Mariabelle, the way it connects back to the very first scene of Zero is so good. Like, the way the game kind of like subtly manipulates the player into taking something for granted there by showing them that scene in full without Estelle and Joshua. And I mean, I mentioned that the reason, like, I thought that was odd when Estelle and Joshua were with us, but then I was like, okay, that was probably just like their way of kind of hiding that fact, which is a very like reasonable explanation, I think. And then having it be revealed later on that no, that scene was like that for a reason. It wasn't just us trying to hide a twist. We were being straight up. You just believed our lie, basically. Or not, you thought we were lying when we weren't, is I guess the way I should say it. So yeah, that was just a truly amazing plot point. Even though I will say, I don't know how it fucking makes any gosh dang sense. I guess that implies there's like a multiverse thing that they're going for. I mean, anytime you introduce any sort of like time travel and causality, if you think about it too much, it'll stop making sense. So I'm not going to think about it too much. Is basically the way I treat most time travel type stuff. Or the idea of manipulating events in the past to change the present. Because, I mean, technically there's not really time travel. It's, I don't know. Like I said, if you think about it too much, you break it. And it stops making sense, and I don't want to break it. It's perfect right now. My only real problem with the whole final section is that Mariabelle is a bad villain, and not in a good way. Is she the worst villain? Nah, Yakim's... Actually, I don't know. I think Mariabelle might actually be the worst villain in the series. Yeah, she is. Well, I don't know. Yeah, no, she is. Because Wiseman has the benefit of being like genuinely pretty chilling as a villain. Like his just... And Mariabelle is also like casually cruel as well, but something about Wiseman's just hit different. Probably also because he was first in the series, so he gets a bit of like extra street cred in that regard. And even Yakum kind of had this insanity that made him somewhat compelling as a villain. Combined with like, I guess I could kind of see how Yakum came to believe what he did, the idea that Adios is like a fake god, so to speak. Because I mean, I can kind of understand coming to that belief, considering that, you know, Adios doesn't actually have any real appreciable, like, I mean, there's hints that she exists, right? But they're not anything a normal person would have access to believe in. So it kind of, I guess it makes more sense to believe in the thing that you can see. You know, you see this Kia girl, you've been told that she's been around for hundreds of years. That feels more godlike than something that, you know, you're told exists via scripture, right? If that makes any sense, I can kind of understand how Yakim's viewpoint in that regard. Obviously, you know, a gigantic piece of human trash. I mean, all three of them are. But I guess I can understand his ideology a little bit. Whereas Mariabelle is just like, she's just evil. Like, she doesn't really have like a purpose for what she's doing. Like any greater purpose, she just wants infinite power, basically. Like, she wants to have the ability to determine causality for her own benefit and manipulate Kia, because she sees Kia's power as her own birthright as a member of the Croix family. Is kind of what I got out of that, because really she just kind of like shows up and is evil. I don't know. Mariabelle, not a very compelling villain in my mind. The final boss is good. Good. I have some problems with it. I do kind of like that it has a lot of counters to some of the more cheesy strats, right? Like, you know, his attacks pierce evasion, he can nullify guard and stuff like that. My only real problem is the muting kind of sucks. Because it's like, really, the fight wouldn't be hard at all if I had just equipped a frickin' Grail Locket or some sort of anti-mute accessory on Tio. Because it's just kind of, and I mean, also considering he can like dispel you and stuff, it makes it a little bit hard to, I can't remember. Does he only dispels if you use ult, right? Or if you use like actual craft guard or max guard? So I guess that's not much of a problem, but the muting was really annoying on Tio. It made it kind of hard to do damage, and combined with the fact that there's a time limit associated with the fight, him having like all these strats or these abilities that just make the fight last longer kind of sucks. Yeah, I like the fight though. I've said previously, or I think I said during the video itself, I would prefer the fight be like a little annoying but hard than perfectly balanced but easy. So I accept that it's a little annoying, even though I probably wouldn't have been like annoyed at it at all if I just had a way to freaking not get Tio constant muted. I mean, I think also something that I realized this when editing the video, or like rewatching the fight afterwards. I think like one of the strats you could maybe do is just have like everyone, like have someone cast before Tio every time, so that his ability hits someone else. Because I noticed that was happening in our second attempt, the one that we won on, was that like there was several different times where we were able to get a spell off because he was hitting Wazi, who did actually have anti-mute technology, whereas Tio didn't. So that's probably, if I'd kind of realized that in the moment, that he targets the character who is casting first, or it's like you want someone else casting when he attacks, so that then he'll use that ability, especially since it doesn't do any damage. So I think that's like the cheese strat, maybe, is trying to exploit him using arts or something. I don't know. Or really, I think the cheese strat is just having anti-mute technology, so you can just cast your spells, but without having to like heal and everything. Because if it was just an art delay, that'd be one thing, but it was you're delayed or you're canceled and then you're muted as well. So, oh yeah, and I guess another thing is that apparently about the final boss is that on the successful attempt, I was one turn away from being instantly losing the fight, because apparently there's a hidden time limit, and if it goes on for long enough, Kia basically just wills herself out of existence, much like the Septyrionon of Mirage did originally, which, annoying from a gameplay aspect, but story-wise, incredibly thematic and very sad. The ending sequence in Kia's space plane, or whatever you want to call it, inner world, very good. I mean, I love the guy scene. I'm a sucker for any time characters get to talk to like dead relatives. I just like scenes like that. And it was nice to see Lloyd finally get that closure that he's been desiring throughout basically the entire 2 games. And it was nice to see Guy like in an extended sequence, Because really, I mean, we don't get that much insight into Guy's character. You know, there's the Lloyd flashbacks in Zero at the start. You have the sequence when Arios is telling his memories just prior to the final boss fight sequence. And then you have this kind of extended sequence where Guy is talking to Lloyd, which is really nice, and I enjoyed it. Lloyd's final friendship speech shows that he learned from the Master Estelle, the lord of all things friendship related and speeches. I really like the switch between Kia's goddess form and her regular form, or her Septirion form. I've been calling it goddess form in my head for some reason, but I mean, I think it fits, but like, that is really good. Plus the line about, you know, your tackle is in just as good form as always. I really, really liked it. My biggest complaint with the game, and I think this is the one thing that keeps the ending, at least. The ending would be actually perfect if it wasn't for this one thing. The final 2 credit slides. I absolutely hate that they spoil the outcome of the Civil War like that. I've been waiting so long to see what happens in this goddamn Civil War, and then to just tell me the ending in a 1-sentence fucking slide. I'm so mad about it. Because, like, I've actually known about the Erebonian... I'm gonna come clean on this. I've known about the Erebonian Civil War for, like, longer than I should have. I've known about it since I beat Trails in the Sky 1, and it was right after Cold Steel 2 was ported to PC, and Steam recommended it to me one time, and I read the blurb, and the blurb on Steam for Cold Steel 2 is that a civil war has broken out in Erebonia, ... And, you know, I never, like, clicked on the game store page or anything, but I just happened to, like, hover my mouse over it while scrolling through Steam one time, and I saw that sentence, and then I was like, oh, well, I guess that's what happens at the end of Cold Steel 1, and then I kind of felt bad about it, but then in Trails 2, they very much hint at the idea of a civil war. They hint at it again in Trails 3, they hint at it again in Zero, they mentioned it in Azure, and I'm like, oh man, I'm getting freaking hyped to learn about the Civil War. And then they're like, oh yeah, Osborne wins off screen, haha. Like, it's hard to be invested in the idea when I already know what happens. Like, to me, the game telling me it at the end of Azure and Aside is not that much different than if someone just commented on, like, the first Cold Steel video and was like, hey, Goliath wins. Like, it's so annoying. Why would they do that? It's a baffling design decision, because it's gonna kind of like, it's gonna eliminate an amount of tension during the Cold Steel games, knowing how this Civil War thing ends up. Additionally, the same could be said for the invasion of Crossbell. Like, the idea is solid. I like the idea of Crossbell being invaded, and I like the idea of it losing and Lloyd and everyone having to form like a resistance within the city. That's a really cool idea and very underutilized within games. But it would have been much better if they had just implied an invasion and then left it up to the player's mind and then told us about it, like, once it actually happens. Like, get to actually kind of see it or expand on it more than just 1 sentence 5 seconds before the credits start rolling. You know? Like, just... Because, like, imagine if the game just ended with the idea that, like, or like in some ominous phrase about, you know, maybe the Empire invading. That would be so much cooler than if it was just, than the way it is, where it's just like, yep, Empire wins, and they invade, and, here's who made the game. See ya. I don't like that. You know? It just eliminates, like, such a great element of tension for no reason whatsoever. I mean, I guess it's supposed to be shocking, but instead of shocking me, it just kind of pissed me off. And honestly, if those 2 credit slides were deleted from the game, I think the ending of Azure would literally be, like, basically perfect. But that does kind of sour it, and I can't, like, lie and pretend that it doesn't bother me. So overall, I mean, it's hard for me to say if Azure is my favorite or not. I think Azure has some incredibly high highs I think it's got a few lows, like just in that whole kind of, I mean, as I kind of have talked about, like really my two biggest complaints with the game, that it feels like your actions for the first 4 chapters aren't actually that important, and I really fucking hate that they spoil what happens in Erebonia in 2 sentences. Just a truly baffling decision. And so it's hard for me to say. I don't know if I like it more than Trails 2 though. I feel like the first half of Trails 2 is better than Azure, but I feel like Azure's final chapter is like easily the best in the series. And honestly, I think if it wasn't for those 2 slides that pissed me off, I would be so enamored with the ending of Azure that it would probably be my favorite. But because I can't separate that feeling of disappointment, that I think Trails 2 is still my favorite, but it's very close. Like, it's very close. I think I can't pretend that I slightly prefer Trails 2 at the end of the day. Now, that could change as time passes and maybe my negative memories of Azure fade and only the positive stuff remains, which is what always happens to me in games. I always forget about the stuff that annoyed me and I just remember the positive stuff. Maybe then Azure will be my favorite. It's hard to say, but like in the immediate aftermath, it's hard for me to ignore how bad of a decision spoiling the outcome of the Civil War is and the invasion of Crossbell. And I do also have like the other legitimate kind of story complaint about like the first 4 chapters. It doesn't feel like you're doing anything important, which feels like such a weird pace because it feels like you're doing more important things in 0. When you're like, the story of 0 is this kind of like from humble beginnings, you're starting from nothing and slowly establishing the SSS as like a important force in the city. And then in Azure, when you're supposed to be an important force that has already kind of saved the country, you spend like the first 2/3 of the game doing fucking nothing. Like nothing important, right? I mean, you do stuff, but it doesn't actually matter, I guess is the way I would describe it. With that kind of final negative note, Azure is still fucking amazing. Just, it's a truly, truly special game. I don't really know how else to expand on it besides that. Like, it's very good. And I think those are pretty much my final thoughts in regard to Azure. Now you might notice the video isn't over yet. What do you mean your final thoughts? There's still a bunch of stuff left. That's because we're going to move on to some viewer requested topics. You know, I mentioned in a comment that if you wanted me to talk about anything in this video, go ahead and tell me on the actual finale. And 2 people chimed in and asked about some stuff, and let's go over them. Plus, I still have to talk about the Cold Steel Let's Play, which will be at the very, very end. So, the first viewer requested topic was, what are my theories on Ouroborus? My theories on Ouroborus are, well, vague, much like the organization. I feel like the reason it's hard to pin down Ouroborus at this point in the story for me is that we've been presented with we've clashed with them 2 different times in the series, and both times they've had essentially different goals. Both of their plans involve the Septyrions, but for different reasons. Wiseman wanted the Auriel for his own personal gain. He wanted to use the Auriel and its power. And it's also unclear to what degree the Librel arc incident with the Auriel was sanctioned by the Grand Master, because it's kind of implied that Wiseman's like doing his own thing over there in regard to the Auriel. So I'm not entirely sure about that, because it seems like, because if we just look at Wiseman alone, then you could maybe think that, oh, okay, well, it seems like they want to get control over the Septyrions because they're powerful objects. But in Azure, they're not really concerned with getting the Septyrion of Mirage or reviving it. They participate in a support role. More just to kind of... I mean, I really still don't fully understand what they're doing in Crossbell in regard to why they help revive the Septyrion. it could be that once it's revived, because they revive the Septirion of Mirage into the Septirion of Zero, and then they just kind of like fuck off, pretty much. Campanella and Arian Road stay behind. Arian Road stays behind because Kia asked her to, or at least that's the explanation. And Campanella stays behind because, well, I don't know. I think he just wants to fight the SSS. I think that's his reasoning, really. And Novartis kind of stays behind because, well, he wants to see his robots in action, right? And he also needs to take them back because they're on loan. Not really, but they're on loan not from him, but you know, he's loaning them out to Dieter, and he charges 24% interest per day, per hour, second. I don't know. My brain's getting a little fried. I don't know what time we're at because this video is split into multiple parts. Or like I've stopped and started the recording at various points to go get water. I think we're definitely over 2 hours at this point, probably. So another reason I'm kind of confused about Ouroborus is, it's like, but since they just kind of leave the Septirion of Mirage, which I know it's Zero, but I'm just going to keep saying Mirage, it just seems odd to me that if they needed that power, why would they just kind of let Mariabel have access to it and to almost godlike power? Because imagine, if the SSS doesn't, you know, intervene and stop Kia, if Mariabel is actually able to, like, you know, overwrite Kia's emotions and turn her into a doll, like it's implied that she has the ability to, before Kia, you know, roids out and turns into her, you know, god form, like, Mariabel would have essentially, like, I mean, godlike power and could be like a big pain in the ass for Ouroborus for whatever they're doing. So I don't think they actually really want the Septirions. Or like, they don't want them for themselves, I guess. And another, before I get onto my actual theory, I suppose, there's another kind of unspecified aspect in the game. It's the exact specifics of the Great Collapse. So it's definitely implied that the Septirions were involved in the Great Collapse, right? Like, the idea that the Auriel, like, they had to seal it away, which was part of the reason why the Zemurian civilization in Liberal maybe collapsed, is because they lost access to that gift, because the gift ended up being too powerful for them, or, you know, too strong for them to really utilize properly. Another thing is like, so it seems like it's been established that the worship of Adios and like the current church came after the Great Collapse, right? But the Zemurians mention a great goddess who gave them gifts, which are the Septirions, right? I don't know if they actually mention Adios by name, but I do know that the logs that you find in Trails 2 on the Liber arc mention that they got these gifts from a goddess, right? Or the gift of the Auriel. So it's not really clear to me, like how long Adios has existed as a goddess that's worshipped, because I felt like it was established that the Church of Adios kind of came into being after the Great Collapse and was like the unifying force that kind of helped rebuild the more modern civilization 1200 years ago. But the Zemurian logs seem to imply that Adios existed as a being of worship prior to that. So I'm a little confused on that. I mean, they could necessarily be the same, I guess, but I don't know. But like, really, my only guess as to what Ouroborus is doing is that since they seem to be concerned with awakening the Septirions, but don't seem to actually want the powers themselves, is that they exist in order to basically see if humanity is ready for these gifts again. Because I think it's going to be implied, based on the 2 out of the 7 we've seen, both situations where, like, the gifts were too powerful and not something humanity was ready for. Like in the Auriel's case, they had to seal it away. And in the Mirage case, the Mirage had to will itself out of existence because it was, like, too painful of an existence to, you know, be controlling all of humanity's wishes, basically. So it could be that, like, they're awakening the Septirions just as a way to see if, you know, humanity is ready for them, which would explain why they don't care about gaining the powers for themselves, because they have a hands-off approach. If humanity abuses it, like say Wiseman does, or the way Mariabell does, and loses it, then that's no skin off their teeth. They're just there to test and see if humanity's ready for it. They don't actually care if they pass or fail, if that makes any sense. That, or they're just like, people are stupid and they're gonna destroy the things for us, so why should we care? It's either like that, or, you know, maybe they want them destroyed, but I feel like if they want them destroyed, then they would take a more active role. And granted, some of them are already destroyed, right? Like, the Mirage one is gone. It's only revived via the efforts of the Croix family. And Ouroborus takes part in supporting them in that. So you would think, if anything, if they wanted them destroyed, they would not help in that regard. I mean, I'm kind of like thinking aloud right here, basically. So it's definitely not that they want to destroy the Septurions. I don't know. I just feel like we kind of, I don't know enough, really. Again, I'm still a little confused on the whole Great Collapse stuff. And like, this is not necessarily an invitation to tell me about it, unless it's information that's already been revealed. Don't like mention anything from previous games, because this is a mystery that, you know, if it has an answer to, I want to kind of learn on my own. If it's, you know, kind of revealed or talked about in later games. If it's something that's already been talked about and I should know it, then fine, you can tell me, I suppose. But another thing that was asked was what I thought about the books from the games. Unfortunately, I didn't really read any of the books in Trails in the Sky, because I just had a different mindset in those games, where I was like, I don't, you know, I didn't feel as comfortable just wasting a video just reading a book, because I guess there's not as many people who are watching the series as back then, so you're a bit more like self-conscious in that regard. So I think I skimmed one in Trails 3, but I don't remember enough about it to say. So of the two that I've read, which are the ones in, you know, Zero and Azure, I did also hear that apparently some of the books show back up in Cold Steel, so I'll read them then. And granted, some of the books are just hard to freaking read. Like the Jack book from Trails 2, you need like, you basically need a guide to get all the books, which is kind of the same how it was in Zero and Azure in regards to the Back Alley Doctor and Sunshine Agnes, but it was a bit easier in those games compared to Trails 2, I think. Because in Trails 2, I got like one book from the very beginning of the entire game. And I got like half of the Back Alley Doctor ones in Zero, and I got like 3/4 of the Sunshine Agnes in my normal playthrough. So, I forgot what I was going to say. I don't know. Oh yeah, of the two, I like Back Alley Doctor more. Just a little bit. Sunshine Agnes, I think Back Alley Doctor has like a better story and whatnot. Sunshine Agnes does have interesting implications though, and it would be kind of cool if it's, I mean, I feel like it is alluding to the idea of real magicians, which we kind of know exist in regard to like people, like some of the Ouroborus members, like, you know, some of the stuff that like Campanella does, for example, is like basically magic. That's not just Orbal stuff. And even like with the church thaumaturgy, which I guess also kind of connecting back to the Ouroborus theory, I feel like there's probably like a religious background as well. It could be like based on their rivalry with the church. It could be that there's something to do with them existing as kind of a alternate version of the Church of Adios or something like that. I don't know. Like the idea that they going into this idea that like magic used to be a thing that everyone had access to, as opposed to something that can only be reached via orbments. It could be something to do with that maybe they're like the original successors to magic. Granted, you know, the Ouroborus recruiting thing is kind of weird, but and we don't know enough about the leader yet. Like, we don't know if like the leader is like some sort of like immortal being, quasi kind of like the same way that apparently Aryan Road maybe is. I don't know. It's interesting though. The Ouroboros stuff is definitely the most compelling like backline plot of the Trails games, I think. Another thing that was mentioned was S-Craft rankings. So I went and rewatched, or not rewatched, but watched, I mean, some of them I rewatched, but watched all the S-Crafts via the in-game S-Craft viewer after you beat the game. And I'd seen pretty much all of them except for 2, which were the Eidolon gear, which I still have no freaking clue how you're supposed to unlock that. Apparently it's in Orkios Tower. I don't know where you get it, but that's Tio's like upgraded or final S-Craft. And then Mariabel has like a second, what do you call it? S-Craft as well, which is very good. And I think I just remembered. I forgot to write that one down. I think it's called like Merry Merry Castle. But let's add that on the tier list real quick. It's not really a tier list, it's just a Word document. But it's like, I think it's called Merry Merry Castle. And I said list while I was typing, so I typed out list. I typed out Merry Merry List instead of Merry Merry Castle. I know English. What I don't know what I'll do for like a visual thing here. I might just like include a screenshot of this Word document where I have them written out as A through F tier. So we're going to focus more on the, we'll actually start from the bottom and go up, because the bottom ones there's like nothing to say. Those are the ones that are very basic. So like the F tier in terms of, and this also includes combo crafts. Zero Field, it doesn't do anything, man. She just kind of like waves her staff. I mean, it's the best ult in the entire game, but visually speaking, which is how I'm judging them, garbage. Tiger Charge, Lloyd just like hits someone, lame. Deadly Heaven, Wazi jumps in the air and kicks, lame. Burning Rage, as much, I hate to say this because we use Burning Rage so much, but the actual animation for Burning Rage is kind of underwhelming. It's just kind of like Lloyd and Randy stand next to a dude and like run into them with their weapons. Strike Heaven, Lloyd and Wazi jump in the air and kick stuff, lame. Riot Star, I don't even remember what it looks like. That's how it's lame. Or that's how lame it is. D tier, Aura Rain, nothing, I mean, it looks kind of cool where Ellie shoots up her pistol and it shoots down like a healing mist on everyone. Ether Buster, just a kind of, you know, little basic plus, I don't know. I forgot what I was going to say. I don't know, it's just kind of a basic, you know, she just kind of has like a cannon and she shoots it. Crimson Gale, you know, it's simple to the point. Randy kind of spins and shoots a wave of fire. Death Scorpion, you know, he just kind of runs into people with the spear halberd thing. Nothing too special about it. I do like when he yells Death Scorpion though. That's pretty cool. That's the main thing saving it from F tier. Crimson Fall, which is Sigmund's ult, where he throws his axes and then like jumps in the air and slams on you. You know, it's not like visually that impressive or nothing. Omega Strike, don't even remember what that one is. Cold Gehenna, I think that's the one where Ellie and Tio do like their dual ice attacks. That one's kind of cool, but it's pretty basic, so it's still in the D tier. Hawkins Storm, don't remember which one that one is. I think that's Tio and Randy's, but I can't remember exactly what it looks like. C tier, Death Parade, that is Shirley's ult, where she, you know, she shoots people a bunch, then shoots fire on them, and then hits them. It's basically just like a better version of Death Scorpion, so it gets C tier and above Death Scorpion. Aeolus's Fury is Arios' first S-Craft, or ult as I often say. I hope that doesn't annoy people. I don't know, sometimes people get like annoyed by non-common, like not using the actual correct name for things, but that's just like his basic level S-Craft. I mean, he just kind of like shows up and hits someone. It's okay, but it's not really that great. Rising Sun, pretty cool. You know, Lloyd kind of like he throws people up in the air and hits them and then turns into a freaking lion and blasts them from below. Aerial Cannon, that is Ellie's S-Craft, where she, you know, shoots her bullets in the air and they rain down on people. Pretty cool. Akashic Arm, which is Wazi's ultimate, where his arm turns into a big thing and he runs into people. It's cool. Visually, it's kind of basic, but him having a demon arm is cool, so it gets knocked up to C tier. Porcelain Dance, and I'm also including True Porcelain Dance here because they're basically the same thing, just with Reach's outfit different. The visuals are the same. I mean, it's fine. The main reason it's in C tier is because I like the moon background when Reacha like jumps up. That's pretty cool. Blast Storm, don't remember what it is. C tier. Star Blast, don't remember what it is. C tier. Brave Hearts, that's the one where Noelle and someone like shoots, I think like Noelle shoots her rockets with Randy, I want to say. Can't remember. Hearts of Iron, pretty good. That's Lloyd and I can't want to say Wazzy. Dudley's thing, where they basically, I mean, it's mainly in C tier because Dudley takes off his shirt, and it's funny when he does that. It's basically just Dudley's regular ult combined with Lloyd mimicking him. It's okay. Blast Hammer, don't remember what that one is. C tier. Sigma Ascension, that's the one where Wazzy bounces that thing between, or he throws the card or whatever. No, he throws like an energy ball and it bounces between Tio's like machine pillar antenna stuff. That one's pretty cool. C tier. Last Rebellion, that is Wazzy and Randy's where they like turn on fire and blast each other or blast people. It's kind of like just a less impressive version of Twin Dragon Strike, which is why it's in C tier, and Twin Dragon Strike is not in C tier. Blue Breaker, that's the one where Wazzy and Tio, like Tio turns people to ice, and then no. Wazzy throws cards that turn people into ice, and then I think Tio shatters them. It's pretty cool. Or no, maybe it's Tio turns them into ice, and then Wazzy throws cards that shatter them. That makes more sense. But whatever, C tier. B tier, Crimson Zanbar, which is, what's her name? Mariabelle's first ult. Her, like, you know, the one that we saw in the video. It's cool. She, like, grows wings and then slashes people. Mainly, it's in B tier because she grows wings and it looks cool. Black Emperor, that is, Arios' upgraded ultimate for the second fight. It's just kind of cool looking when he jumps up in the air and then it puts up all the kanji and then he slashes people. Armed Forces is Noelle's upgraded ult where she calls in the armored cars to blast people. That was just funny because I just like the idea of the armored cars magically appearing out of like space-time to show up in locations where they can't. Justice Hammer, that is Dudley's original ult. I mean, he takes off his shirt and freaking punches people. It's kind of cool. I mean, just because, like, him taking off his jacket is just funny to me. Berserker, Randy's upgraded ult. Pretty cool. You know, I think it's there mainly just because I like the visual effect of when he's, like, shooting and then runs through the people. Like, the sound effects as well. That's the main reason it's in B tier. Howling Raid. I would like to say I remember which one this one is, but I don't. B tier. A tier. Now, I remember all the ones from here on. A tier, Imitation Salt Pail. It's just cool. Like, I mean, it's A, thematically cool in the sense of, you know, the way it references that event that we learned about in Trails 3. And actually, no, I think it's first referenced in Trails 2, I want to say. Yeah, it's a reference for the first time at the end of Trails 2, right? When, Kevin, I kept wanting to say Wazzy for some reason. Kevin, you know, kills Wiseman with the salt arrow of infinite death. Holy Grand Cross, which is Aryan Road. I don't know why I can't remember people's names. Aryan Road's ultimate. I mean, it's cool. It's visually impressive. That's the main reason it's there. When she like creates the tornado and then runs through it and like slashes people with her spear or stabs people. Kind of hard to slash with a. Well, technically it's a lance, but you know what I mean. Twin Dragon Strike, that is Reacha and Lloyd's combo craft. Probably one of the most visually impressive combo crafts where like they turn into like dragons and blast through people. And then Akashic Star. It's an A tier for... It's actually, I think it's a B tier ult, but it's in A tier because of its name. visually, it's like, you know, Wazi creates this thing and then Ellie shoots it and it rains then a bunch of bullets. That's cool. I like the fact that its name is what's cool, though, because it references the name of Wazi's, like, stigma before it's ever revealed, because you get that combo craft earlier. So that's pretty cool. Then the S tier, the best of the best. Merry Merry Castle, which is Mariabel's second ult that we never saw, where it's like a corrupted version of the scary house from Michelin. It involves an evil Mishi that stabs you. It's very good. Divine Crusade, which is Ellie's ultimate ult, doesn't really make much sense. Her final S-craft, where she gets the 2 guns and just starts, you know, doing her best Dante from Devil May Cry impression. Very cool. Meteor Breaker, Lloyd turns into freaking Sonic the Hedgehog, man. I mean, it had to be an S tier. Had to be. The next S tier, Justice Magnum, which is, it's like Dudley's first ultimate. I don't think we never saw this one on screen either, because I didn't realize Dudley got a new ultimate, but I did, you know, see it via the S-Craft viewer after beating the game. It's amazing. He takes off his jacket, and then he punches people, and then he, like, does an ultimate Shoryuken of justice, and yells out Justice Magnum, and it's great. And last, but definitely not least, Eidolon Gear, which is Tio's ultimate that is hidden, apparently. It's fucking like 5 minutes long. I think that alone makes it S tier category. She like summons a robot and gets in the robot, and then the robot starts like shooting shit. It's just cool. I like it. Now moving on to our final viewer requested topic, character rankings. So we're ranking 10 characters, just the playable ones. Well, the playable ones minus Garcia, because, well, Garcia's last, so I didn't feel like even writing anything about him. He's 11th. But the 10 other playable characters, this includes Arios, just because, I mean, technically you can only use him in combat for like 2 seconds at the start of the game, but he's in enough of the overall story that I feel okay ranking him. Number 1, so we're both going to talk about how I feel about them in story, and then also kind of briefly mention they're like, give them a tier ranking in combat. Some of the tier rankings for combat are kind of just like, for some of the characters I didn't use or a little made up, or like don't put much stock in them, because some of the characters I just did not use very much, and it's kind of just going off like a basic understanding of their abilities without really using them much myself. So number 1, Randy. I mean, you know he was there. I've gushed enough about Randy. Reasons why he's the best. A, he's my boy. B, he's my boy. C, he's my boy. D, he's got the most character development in the entire game. Just, I really like his backstory and the idea of like his internal kind of struggle with it, and the way it's framed is not just like, he's not just like that kind of inner turmoil based around, he's not just like ashamed of what he did, like he's kind of like still almost longs for that life in a way, and like the way he kind of has to, like he's having difficulty adjusting to normal life is kind of interesting. I mean, I don't really know how much else I can say about Randy. He's awesome. Best character. Combat-wise, he's actually not that great. I know there's like some meme strats you can do like early on with his like ultimate that has like that 100% burn rate and stuff, but or there's a support craft. I can't remember. I know there's like some meme strats with him in regards to like burn strats against certain fights, but I don't count that because I didn't do that with him. His like strict abilities, I feel like he's better in Zero than he is in Azure, mainly because AT delay isn't nearly as good in Azure as it is in Zero. But all around him, he's like a solid B tier character. We kind of used him more for just because he gave us access to Burning Rage, and then we kind of transitioned him into a support character over time. Arios is number 2. I kind of already mentioned that Arios is, you know, I've gushed about him enough. So we're going to be more focused on combat, which I don't really have too much to say. He's like A tier. He's got really good abilities. You only use him the one time. He's got a cool ult that hits the entire screen. Yeah, that's Arios. Kind of already spoiled what I thought about him earlier, but it's very interesting character. I love that they kind of made me dislike him. Well, they made me like be ambivalent to dislike, to hate, to love. That's very good. Wazi, he's my boy too, you know? He's our boy as well. I like his nonchalant attitude throughout the game. He's brings a great energy to the party. I really enjoy all the scenes where he teases Lloyd. And he also has that air of mystery throughout basically the entire time he's in Zero and most of the time he's in Azure. That makes him a lot more compelling because you're kind of always wondering, like, what's the explanation for Wazi going to be? Combat-wise, I think he's actually one of the weakest characters in the game. He has some utility as like a craft and art canceller with his Trinity card attack. And his speed debuff is good in the early game, but eventually you get access to Clock Down and Calamity Claw, and then ultimately speed debuffs stop working entirely. So he's okay early game, but he really falls off later than that. So I would say like just his unique abilities, he's like a C tier character. Now, the thing with this kind of idea is that every character is good in the game because the game is easy. And you can make every character good if you use the right, like, you know, any of the right combination of arts and abilities. Wazi, he does have a really good line, though, that makes him a good caster. So maybe that makes him a B tier, actually. Yeah, honestly, Wazi B tier. I changed my mind. There's no C tier characters. Spoilers. Wazi was the only one, but then I'm like, oh yeah, the reason I used him is because he has a great magic line. Someone's got to be C tier. Who gets downgraded? You know what? You're getting downgraded. Number 4, Lloyd. He's just a great all-around main character. Like, he, one of the things I really like about Lloyd is how he kind of has this fairly normal worldview in comparison to, like, all the other characters. And he doesn't feel, like, super special. Like, he's just kind of like a normal guy. But he does have a very, like, an interesting backstory, especially in the way it, like, relates to his role within the city. Like, you know, his kind of, like, the idea of him inheriting this, trying to think, like, burden's not the right word, but this torch, so to speak, from Guy, and him kind of carrying on Guy's mission is really cool. Got a great personality. I like how he's, like, very smart and competent, in terms of, like, his detective skills. And one thing that's kind of, there's a disconnect between gameplay and story here. Gameplay-wise, Lloyd is treated as story-wise, Lloyd is treated as a weakling who has to constantly be saved. Combat-wise, he's like one of the best characters in the entire freaking game. He's actually the second best character, I would say. Actually, he's probably but I don't know. He's tied for best character, I would say, in terms of like overall combat strength. I mean, he's got a unique special ability in the Raging Spin, or whatever, what's it called? You know, his pulling ability. Very good, super strong. Has access to, you know, he's a character that can hit 100% evasion with some of his weapons. And just has really strong abilities and ultimates, and a lot of combo crafts. Strong character. Number 5, Tio. I like Tio, man. I just like her personality. I kind of like that shift between her being like cool and reserved at times, but also she's kind of a dork in like a really funny way. Like, you know, her obsession with Mishi and some of her more like I guess like childish. I don't mean that as like a bad way, but like, you know, more typically considered childish behavior. Like, in that kind of contrast between how she's like very reserved and level-headed for the most part. Also, I think she has some like nice scenes where, especially that scene that I mentioned earlier, the intermission scene where she kind of like is the one who cheers up Lloyd when he's down in the dumps, is really nice, and like nice character development for her. And she's like maybe the best character in combat, just because she's got an amazing line, very good abilities, and she blasts people with magic and isn't afraid of anyone and has the best ultimate slash S-craft in the entire game. Tio, everyone. She's good. Number 6, Riksha. Kind of a bit of a sleeper here. She's not in the game all that much compared to the other characters. You know, she's not actually a playable character. Well, technically, I guess you play with Yin and Zero very briefly, but she's got a really cool backstory and her overall character arc of her kind of coming to discover, you know, what it means to be Yin for her and how she can kind of find her own meaning in life without being completely attached to this inherited role. I do find her a little bit too reserved for my own personal taste. I think I like a bit more outgoing characters. Well, I like a balance, right? I think, I don't know. Kind of depends. Sometimes I like outgoing characters, sometimes I can find them annoying. So it really is on like a character by character basis, but I do like Riksha. And her being kind of reserved does make sense for a character, so I think that's like good theming in that regard. Combat-wise, I didn't really use her very much. I'd say she's like at least B tier, maybe A tier. It's hard for me to really say. I know her one ability that like kind of pulls people in, that's probably really good, the same reason like Lloyd's is, but didn't use her enough to have like a super strong idea of how good she is in combat. And she does have an ult that hits the entire screen, which is nice. So that's something. Noelle, number 7. Sadly, she doesn't get very much development until the end of the game when they touch on her like joining the defense force and how and the reasons why she did it. But overall, she's a solid character. She's got this deep love for her country and feels this obligation to protect it in order to honor her father, which I thought was neat. Solid personality overall. Combat-wise, probably B tier. I did downgrade her to C tier after we upgraded Wazi, because someone has to be in the C tier. And now that I'm looking, actually another character's in C tier. So you know what? You can be B tier. I lied. I'm sorry, Noelle. B tier, because you've got some neat abilities. You know, the strength debuff is nice for like the early game. Some of the movement stuff can be useful in some of the fights. Your auto attack is AoE, which is good in some of the situations. So, good character. I don't really know if her combo crafts are any good. That's like one of the main things that I think would decide if she's a good physical character or not, but I don't know. Number 8, Ellie. I've never hidden the fact that I'm not like a huge fan of Ellie from a personality standpoint. And honestly, I don't even think it's her fault. I think the problem with Ellie is that she's a normal character surrounded by extraordinary people. Like, everyone else in the game has some sort of crazy backstory and motivation for the most part, with the exception of like Lloyd. And Ellie's just like kind of a normal girl from, you know, I mean, she has her own like I think it's kind of interesting about Ellie is that her trauma, so to speak, you know, in regard to her parents like divorcing and kind of like abandoning her with her grandfather, is actually like a very relatable sense of trauma, or like, you know, personal backstory. Everyone else has like some crazy trauma that like, who the hell can relate to this shit? You know, Randy being a child soldier, Wazi being like a possessed by a demon, kind of, or like in a religious figure. Tio was kidnapped by a child murdering cult. Riksha was aimed to be an assassin from the time she was born. Okay, Noelle actually has a pretty normal backstory as well. But like, Ellie is just, you know, I guess she doesn't stand out as much in that regard. And I feel like this is just personal preference, right? She's a little too reserved for me. She's still a good character. I do want to mention, like, none of these characters are bad, but somebody's got to be at the bottom. And I'm sorry, Ellie, but it's you. And also, I do feel like she's a little too similar to Chloe from Trails in the Sky, which is something I've mentioned a lot. And since I like Chloe so much, I just feel like Ellie's a worse version of her, which is probably unfair to Ellie as a character, but that's kind of how I feel. Combat-wise, A tier. She's very good. She's probably like as good as Tio, it's just her ultimates aren't as good. She does have not Heaven's Kiss, that's Shira's move. Strike Bell, which is incredible. It's like one of the best crafts in the entire game. Number 9, Dudley. He's not in the game all that much and doesn't really have like a character arc. Or really much of like a backstory for his character. But I do like his relationship with Lloyd as kind of a rival slash mentor. Plus, I like how Dudley kind of slowly grows to respect the SSS over time. Combat-wise, didn't really use him that much. B tier. He's got a few nice abilities. Yeah, that's it. Number 10, Zeit. Didn't really, I mean, you only use him for a very brief amount of time. He doesn't really have a personality until the final chapter of Azure. I do think he's an interesting character though, and I do like the idea of him being presented as this like proud and noble creature who loves playing with children and being treated like a good boy. So Zeit's cool. I like him still. He just doesn't really have that much going for him in comparison to the other playable characters. And combat-wise, he's like C tier. I don't know. I didn't really use him very much. His crafts aren't that good, I don't think. And with that said, we are finally pretty much done. Before we end things, brief update on Cold Steel. Oh my god, I can't keep talking. I think this video is like 2.5 hours maybe. So the Cold Steel update. I'm going to start recording it Monday. Monday the 5th? What day is it? The 5th. Monday the 5th. Expect the first video Tuesday. Maybe Wednesday at the most, at the latest. We will probably do 2 a day at the start of the Let's Play, and then switch to 1 a day, maybe once we finish like the prologue. You know, do 2 a day for that kind of like maybe first week or so. And then switch to 1 a day, mainly because doing 2 Azure videos a day, especially since they were like an hour long, was a bit much for me. To just like, you know, to record at least 2 hours a day, like on average, combined with having to render out 3 hours of footage just for like 2 to 2.5 hours of footage for Azure every single day, was a bit much just because my computer doesn't render out videos that quickly and my internet upload speed is very slow as well. So it was kind of hard to keep up with 2 Azure videos a day. I felt better about it because A, there were more people watching because there was kind of, the Let's Play was timed with the release of the Geofront patch, so there was like extra excitement for it. I fully expect Cold Steel to do a little bit worse than Azure in terms of viewership, which is fine, but I do think there's going to be like less of a demand for it, so we'll probably take it a little bit slower in that regard. Probably once I finish the game, we'll go back to 2 a day, once that means I won't have to like, you know, be actively recording it as much, just to let me build up a bit of a backlog. So basically Cold Steel will probably have more of a backlog than Azure, but probably not as much as some of the previous Trails games where it's like, you know, a month or more backlog. I'm also going to try and play it with the difficulty mod, since I've had a few different people recommend it as something I should probably do. And after reading up on it some and thinking about it, I think it's going to be I think I want to try it out. I think it'll be fun, and if I don't like it, then, you know, that's so be it. Essentially, I had fun power tripping in Azure, but honestly the game is just too easy, and I feel like after kind of crushing Azure, I don't have anything to prove anymore. I think I kind of mentioned this earlier in the video, but like I had a slight chip on my shoulder over being bad at Trails 1 and 2. And granted, once again, like it's not, I think I mentioned this in the Azure Let's Play at one point, there's no real skill involved, it's just knowledge of game mechanics, and Trails 1 has a very bad tutorial that doesn't really tell you anything unless you go into your Bracer notebook, which the game doesn't really do a good job of stressing just exactly how important the Bracer notebook is. It's just kind of like offhandedly mentioned by Shira during the tutorial. And then even when you open it, there's like 30 different tabs and you just like have information overload and you shut it down. But I forgot what I was going to say. But yeah, we're going to try it with the difficulty mod. It might be a little too hard, and I might rage, but I think actually the fact knowing that the difficulty is artificially increased will actually be anti-rage technology. Because I won't be mad about it because I know it's something I've brought on myself. So yeah, I think it'll be fun. That's pretty much the plan for Cold Steel. We're going to be starting it a lot sooner than I initially expected, basically just because I've got the itch. I've been fighting off the urge to play it like the entire week. I wanted to wait until the Let's Play actually finished and whatnot before I started it. So yeah, I'm Extra Cheesy 87. Stay tuned for that Cold Steel Let's Play. And bye, guys.